The ER doors exploded open as the trauma team wheeled in the senator's mangled body, blood painting the white tiles like a Jackson Pollock nightmare. Dr. Marcus Chen barked orders while shoving the quiet new nurse aside, the same one he'd forced to scrub toilets that morning. Elena Marsh didn't flinch. She'd seen worse in Fallujah. What Chen didn't know was that the Navy Seahawk circling overhead wasn't there for him. Outside, rotors screamed against the Colorado sky as armed operators fast-roped onto the hospital lawn, their boots crushing the CEO's prized hydrangeas. The team leader had one question: where the hell is Petty Officer Marsh? Chen's smirk died when Elena stepped forward, her surgical precision suddenly making terrible, beautiful sense. They'd spent 6 months breaking her. She'd spent 12 years breaking enemy lines. Before we dive into Elena's story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far this tale of silent justice travels across the globe. Now, let's begin where it all started to unravel. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Point General Hospital hummed their usual dirge at 6:47 a.m. when Elena Marsh pushed through the staff entrance, her third shift in as many days. The building squatted like a concrete fortress on the edge of Copper Valley, a mountain town that prided itself on being 40 miles from anything that mattered. Elena kept her head down, dark hair pulled tight, scrubs deliberately one size too large. Invisibility was a survival skill she'd perfected long before she ever set foot in this particular war zone. Coffee, black, and don't burn it like yesterday. Dr. Marcus Chen didn't look up from his tablet as he issued the command, his voice carrying that particular blend of boredom and contempt that Elena had cataloged in 18 different superior officers across 4 combat deployments. Chen was 36, Johns Hopkins educated, and utterly convinced that his MD granted him dominion over every breathing thing in the building. His perfectly pressed white coat bore his name in embroidered navy thread, Dr. Marcus Chen, Chief Resident, Emergency Medicine, as if anyone might forget who ruled this particular kingdom. Elena nodded once and headed toward the break room. Behind her, she heard Nurse Supervisor Patricia Vance's stage whisper, "That's the 3rd time this week he's used her as a waitress. Someone should report him." "Someone should mind their own business," came the reply from Nurse Danielle Frost, whose platinum highlights cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Maybe if Little Miss Quiet actually spoke up instead of playing mute, people would respect her. Elena's hands didn't shake as she poured the coffee. They'd stopped shaking in 2019, somewhere between her second gunshot wound and her first Navy Cross recommendation. The trick was breathing, 4 counts in, hold for 7, release for 8. The same technique that kept her steady when she was wrist-deep in a Marine's chest cavity while mortars bracketed their position. She delivered the coffee to Chen, who accepted it without acknowledgement, already barking instructions to a terrified intern about proper intubation technique. Elena melted back into the nursing station, claiming the corner desk that nobody wanted because it faced the supply closet instead of the ER floor. "Marsh, Trauma Bay 3 needs cleaning. Last night's GSW case left a mess." Elena looked up to find Danielle Frost looming over her, arms crossed, expression broadcasting pure malicious pleasure. GSW, gunshot wound. Elena had cleaned up after hundreds of them. The difference was that in Kandahar, nobody asked her to mop the floors afterward. "I'm charting the—" "Did I ask what you were doing?" Danielle's voice climbed half an octave. "Dr. Chen specifically requested you handle it. Something about making sure our newest nurse understands every aspect of emergency care." The emphasis on newest was deliberate. Elena had been at Mercy Point for 6 months, longer than 2 other nurses who'd started after her and were already being trusted with critical patients. But those nurses laughed at Chen's jokes. They brought him homemade cookies. They understood the invisible currency that purchased survival in places like this. Elena stood without a word and headed for the supply closet. Behind her, she heard Danielle's satisfied snort, followed by whispered commentary from the other nurses. The ones who'd decided within Elena's first week that her quietness meant weakness, that her lack of social performance meant she was less than. Trauma Bay 3 looked like a slaughterhouse floor. Blood had pooled and dried in the corners where the cleaning crew's mops hadn't reached. Gauze and discarded equipment littered the floor. Elena suited up in gloves and began the methodical process of restoration. her mind splitting into the familiar dual track, surface thoughts managing the immediate task while deeper currents ran their own calculations. She was scrubbing dried blood from the base of the crash cart when she heard the commotion from the main ER. "I need someone competent. Where's Rodriguez? Where's anyone who's actually worked in MCI before?" Chen's voice, pitched to Carrie, designed to induce panic. MCI, mass casualty incident. Elena's pulse didn't elevate. She'd worked MCIs where the casualties arrived in pieces, where the living and the dead came in the same ambulance because there wasn't time to sort them. She finished cleaning the bay, returned the supplies, and was washing her hands when Patricia Vance appeared in the doorway, her usually composed face tight with stress. "Elena, we need everyone on the floor. Highway 40 pileup. At least 15 casualties inbound. ETA 4 minutes." Finally, Elena dried her hands and followed Patricia into the organized chaos of the ER, preparing for surge capacity. Nurses scrambled to clear bays, residents barked questions at each other, and Chen stood in the center of it all like a general marshaling troops he didn't quite trust. "Listen up," Chen's voice cut through the noise. "We're going to have more patients than beds. I want triage protocols followed to the letter. Nothing creative, nothing heroic. If they're category black, we move on. We cannot afford to waste resources on lost causes. Am I clear?" A chorus of acknowledgments echoed back. Elena said nothing, but her jaw tightened imperceptibly. Category black. Expectant. The designation for patients too injured to save, marked for comfort care only. She'd fought that designation before, won battles that protocols said were unwinnable. But this wasn't her war, and she wasn't authorized to lead. The first ambulance screamed into the bay at 7:23 a.m. Elena moved into position as the paramedics burst through the doors with a middle-aged woman, face lacerated, left leg twisted at an angle that made the interns go pale. Stephanie Morrison, 43, T-boned by a semi, GCS 14, BP 90 over 60, and dropping, femur fracture, possible internal bleeding, Bay 7. Chen cut off the paramedic's report and pointed. "Marsh, you take her. Basic stabilization only. We need the docs for critical cases." Elena moved. She'd been Marsh since her first day. Never Elena, never anything that acknowledged personhood. Just Marsh, the quiet one, the one you could order around. She guided the gurney into Bay 7 while the paramedics rapid-fired details she was already 3 steps ahead of. Stephanie Morrison was conscious but drifting, her pupils responsive but sluggish. Shock was setting in, the body's last-ditch effort to preserve core function by shutting down the periphery. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency, starting a second IV line, hanging fluids, calling for cross-match blood before anyone could tell her not to. "Stephanie, can you hear me?" Elena kept her voice low, calm. "I'm Elena. You've been in an accident, but you're at the hospital now. We're taking care of you." Stephanie's eyes found her, confused and terrified. My daughter. She was in the car, Emma, 7 years old, pink backpack. Did they find her? Please, did they? "The paramedics are still on scene bringing people in," Elena said, not lying but not offering false hope either. "Right now, I need you to stay still for me. Can you do that?" But Stephanie was already fading, her blood pressure dropping despite the fluids. Elena's eyes tracked the monitors, heart rate climbing, respiratory rate shallow, skin cool and clammy. Classic hemorrhagic shock. Somewhere inside Stephanie Morrison, something was bleeding that shouldn't be. "I need a doctor in Bay 7. Elena's voice carried without shouting, the tone that had once summoned corpsmen across mortar-pounded compounds. Chen appeared in the doorway, annoyed. "What part of basic stabilization confused you, Marsh?" "She's hemorrhaging. BP 85 over 55 and dropping. Abdomen is rigid. She needs imaging and probably surgery." Chen glanced at the monitors, at Stephanie's pale face, and his expression hardened into something Elena recognized, the look of a man about to make a decision based on politics rather than medicine. "She's stable enough. Keep her comfortable and monitored. We have a 10-year-old in Bay 2 with a tension pneumothorax and a pregnant woman seizing in Bay 4. Those are our priorities. If she's bleeding into her abdomen, then we'll deal with it when we have resources. Right now, you're wasting my time with a stable patient. Chen turned and left. Elena stood there, hands still on Stephanie Morrison's wrist, feeling the pulse flutter like a dying bird. Stable. Stephanie Morrison was about as stable as a house on fire, but Chen had made his call, and Elena was just a nurse. Just Marsh. The quiet one who should know her place. She stayed with Stephanie anyway, adjusting fluids, monitoring vitals, running calculations in her head about how much time they had before Stable became critical, became deceased. Around her, the ER descended into controlled mayhem. More ambulances arriving, more trauma cases flooding in. The staff stretched thin across too many catastrophes. At 8:15 a.m., a teenage boy arrived in full cardiac arrest. Elena heard the commotion from Bay 7, the crash cart racing past, Chen shouting orders, the high-pitched whine of the defibrillator charging. She couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear it, the organized panic of a code blue, the rhythm of CPR, the desperate bargaining with death that emergency medicine required. Charge to 200, clear. The thump of electricity jolting a stopped heart. Still V-fib, continue compressions, push another round of epi. Stephanie Morrison's pressure dropped to 80/50. Elena increased her fluids, knowing it was a temporary measure, buying time that Chen wasn't willing to spend. She pulled up Stephanie's chart on the computer, no next of kin listed except the daughter. Emma, 7 years old, pink backpack. Elena had seen too many Emmas, children who became orphans in the span of a heartbeat, who had to be told by strangers that mommy or daddy wasn't coming home. She'd held some of them herself, in places that smelled like cordite and blood, her uniform still wet with their parents' last moments. "Marsh, stop daydreaming and get over here!" Chen's voice, sharp with stress. Elena looked once more at Stephanie's monitors, holding, barely, and moved to where Chen stood over the teenage boy. The kid was maybe 16, his chest bare and marked with defibrillator burns, his face slack. Around him, 3 nurses and 2 residents moved in careful choreography, each focused on their assigned task. "We've been at this for 20 minutes, Chen said without looking at Elena. "I need you to take over compressions while Jackson catches his breath. Think you can handle that, or should I find someone competent?" Elena stepped into position. Compressions were simple. 100 beats per minute, depth of 2 inches, letting the chest recoil fully between pumps. She'd done them on rolling boats in storm-tossed seas, in the back of helicopters with the pilot screaming about taking fire, in sandblasted tents with generators dying and headlamps fading. Her hands locked, her shoulders aligned, and she began the rhythm. Staying alive, the old mental soundtrack that everyone used because it was exactly the right tempo. 30 compressions, pause for 2 breaths from the resident managing the airway. 30 more compressions. "How long are we going to work this?" one of the residents asked, and Elena heard what he wasn't saying. "This kid is gone, let's call it." "Until I say we stop," Chen snapped. "His parents are on the way. I'm not calling a 16-year-old dead without trying everything." Everything. The word hung in the air like smoke. They'd done everything by the book: CPR, defibrillation, medications, more defibrillation. But the heart didn't care about books. It either wanted to beat or it didn't, and this heart was deep into its refusal. Elena kept compressions going, her arms burning with the effort, but her form perfect. She'd learned in a class taught by a Navy SEAL who'd made them do compressions until they collapsed, who'd screamed that perfect form for an hour, saved lives, that sloppy form for 5 minutes lost. Her mind split again. Hands on autopilot while her deeper thoughts calculated the odds, assessed the situation, planned for contingencies that Chen wasn't considering. "We have rhythm," the resident on the monitor shouted. "Sinus TAC, 140. Elena pulled back immediately. The boy's chest rose and fell on its own, shallow, irregular, but movement. Chen leaned in, checking pupils with his penlight. "Reactive, barely. Get him to ICU now. Move." The team scattered into motion, prepping the boy for transport. Chen finally looked at Elena, and for just a second, something that might have been respect flickered across his face before being extinguished by his natural superiority complex. "Not bad, Marsh. Get back to Base 7 and keep Morrison stable until we have OR space." Elena returned to find Stephanie Morrison's blood pressure at 75/48. The monitors were screaming warnings that Elena had silenced to avoid panic. She pulled up the imaging request screen and entered the order for an abdominal CT. Unauthorized, but necessary. If Chen wanted to write her up later, fine. Right now, Stephanie Morrison had maybe 30 minutes before her body decided that consciousness was optional. What do you think you're doing? Danielle Frost stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. She'd somehow managed to maintain perfect makeup despite the chaos, her scrubs crisp and unstained. Ordering imaging for internal bleeding, Elena said without turning around. Did Dr. Chen authorize that? Dr. Chen is busy keeping a teenager alive. Mrs. Morrison can't wait. Danielle's laugh was sharp and humorless. You've been here 6 months and you think you can override the chief resident's orders? Girl, you really don't understand how things work, do you? Elena submitted the order and turned to face Danielle fully. I understand that Stephanie Morrison has a daughter who's probably in this ER somewhere, and that daughter deserves to have a mother who doesn't bleed out because we were too busy following chain of command. For a moment, Danielle looked genuinely taken aback. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and familiar. The look of someone whose authority had been questioned by someone they considered beneath them. I'm reporting this to Chen and to Patricia. You're going to learn really quick that playing hero gets you fired in the real world. Danielle spun on her heel and stalked away, already pulling out her phone. Elena turned back to Stephanie, who was mumbling something incoherent. She leaned close, trying to make out the words. Emma? Pink backpack. Soccer practice on Thursday. Forgot to tell her. So proud. Stephanie, stay with me. Don't go to sleep, okay? But Stephanie was fading, her eyes rolling back. Elena checked the monitors, pressure dropping further, heart rate climbing into the 100s and 50s. Compensatory mechanisms failing. She slammed the call button. I need a doctor in Bay 7 immediately. Patient is crashing. But no one came. The ER was a symphony of alarms and shouts, every staff member buried in their own crisis. Elena could hear Chen in the next bay over, arguing with someone from radiology about scan priority. She could hear Patricia's voice trying to coordinate with the OR about surgical space. Everyone was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, following exactly the right protocols, and Stephanie Morrison was dying anyway. Elena made a decision. She grabbed the ultrasound machine, portable, always nearby for quick assessments, and positioned it over Stephanie's abdomen. Her hands moved automatically, the muscle memory of 1,000 field assessments taking over. The screen bloomed with gray and black shadows, and there it was. Free fluid in the abdomen, lots of it, pooling in Morrison's pelvis and around her liver. Blood. Probably from a lacerated spleen or liver, pumping into her abdominal cavity with every heartbeat. Bay 7, what's your status? Patricia's voice over the intercom, harried and sharp. Elena keyed the response. Free fluid in abdomen. Significant hemorrhage. Patient needs emergency surgery now. Dr. Chen already assessed her as stable for monitoring. Dr. Chen was wrong. Silence on the other end. Then, did you just countermand a physician's assessment? I'm reporting what I see on ultrasound. Stephanie Morrison is bleeding internally and her pressure is 70/45. She needs an OR in the next 10 minutes or she's going to code. More silence. Elena could picture Patricia in the nursing station, caught between protocols and reality, between the hierarchy that kept hospitals functioning and the immediate need that was killing a patient. I'm getting Dr. Chen. The intercom clicked off. Elena went back to Stephanie, pushing more fluids, elevating her legs, doing everything she could to buy time. Stephanie's eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow. Elena had seen this progression before, the body's final surrender, the last quiet moments before the alarm screamed and the chaos began. Chen arrived like a thunderstorm, his face flushed with anger and stress. What the hell is this about you contradicting my... He stopped when he saw the ultrasound screen, still displaying Stephanie's abdomen. His eyes tracked from the screen to the monitors to Stephanie's pale face, and Elena watched him do the calculations, watched him realize that his earlier assessment had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. When did you do the scan? His voice was quieter now, dangerous. 3 minutes ago. I didn't authorize imaging. She was dying. I didn't have time to wait for authorization. Chen's jaw clenched so hard Elena could see the muscle jumping. Around them, the ER continued its chaos. But in Bay 7, there was only the sound of failing monitors and two people locked in a battle that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with power. You don't make those calls, Marsh. You're a nurse. Your job is to follow orders, not play doctor. My job is to save lives. Your job, Chen said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to something that only Elena could hear, is whatever I tell you it is. You want to work in my ER? You follow my protocols, you respect my authority, and you sure as hell don't embarrass me by making me look incompetent in front of the entire department. Elena met his eyes and saw it clearly. This was never about Stephanie Morrison. This was about Chen's ego, his reputation, his need to be right even when being right meant someone died. She'd seen it before in officers who sent men on suicide missions rather than admit they'd made tactical errors. She'd hated it then. She hated it now. Call surgery, she said quietly. Or I will. Chen's smile was thin and cruel. You won't do anything. Because if you pick up that phone, I will have security remove you from this hospital and make sure you never work in emergency medicine again. Do you understand me? Behind them, Stephanie Morrison's heart monitor began to alarm, bradycardia, the heart rate dropping as the body gave up its fight. Elena looked at Chen. She looked at Stephanie. She thought about Emma, 7 years old, pink backpack, waiting somewhere to hear if her mother was alive or dead. She picked up the phone. This is RN Marsh in ER Bay 7. I need an emergency surgical team for hemorrhagic shock secondary to internal bleeding. Patient is actively coding. Chen's face went from red to purple. Hang up that phone right now, or I swear to God, Stephanie Morrison, 43 years old, free fluid on ultrasound, vitals crashing. We need an OR immediately. The operator's voice crackled back. Or 4 is available, transferring now, surgical team en route. Elena hung up. Chen grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You just ended your career. I hope you understand that. I'm calling security, and I'm having you removed from this hospital. And then I'm personally going to make sure every hospital in Colorado knows that you're insubordinate, reckless, and dangerous. He pulled out his phone. Elena didn't resist, didn't argue. She'd known the cost when she made the choice. Some decisions were worth the price. Stephanie Morrison's heart rate dropped to 40, 30. The monitor screamed its flatline warning. Elena moved without thinking. 30 years of training compressed into 3 seconds of motion. She tilted Stephanie's head back, positioned her hands on her chest, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm was automatic, ingrained so deep it lived in her bones. What are you? Get off her! Security! Security! Chen was screaming now, but Elena didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Stephanie Morrison had a daughter who deserved a mother, and Elena had made promises long ago to people who would never come home. She couldn't save them. Maybe she could save Stephanie. The surgical team burst through the door at the same moment hospital security arrived, creating a collision of uniforms and authority. Chen was still screaming. Patricia appeared, trying to mediate. Danielle stood in the background, her phone out, recording everything. And through it all, Elena kept compressions going. 30 beats, pause for breaths, 30 more beats. Her arms burned, her shoulders ached. She didn't care. We've got her. A surgeon's voice, calm and authoritative. Step back, nurse. We'll take it from here. Elena stepped back. Her arms trembled now, finally, the adrenaline wearing off to reveal the toll. Stephanie Morrison was wheeled away, the surgical team already intubating her, already running the organized chaos that might save her life. 2 security guards flanked Elena. Patricia looked sick. Chen looked triumphant. Elena Marsh, one of the guards said, you need to come with us. Elena nodded. She was already mentally cataloging her belongings in her locker, already planning her next steps. She'd been fired before, dishonorably discharged from the Navy for an incident that was still classified, still sealed behind enough redactions that even she couldn't read the full report. This was just another kind of discharge, another kind of ending. She was halfway to the security office when the building started to shake. At first, Elena thought it was an earthquake. Colorado got them sometimes, minor tremors from the Rockies settling. But this was rhythmic, pulsing, growing stronger. The ceiling tiles rattled, the windows vibrated, and above it all, a sound that Elena knew in her bones. Rotor wash, A helicopter. Close. Getting closer. Chen looked up, confused. Patricia grabbed a desk as the tremor intensified. The security guards exchanged glances, and Elena smiled for the first time in 6 months because she knew exactly what was about to happen, and it was going to be beautiful. The front windows of the ER exploded inward, not from impact, but from the sheer force of rotor wash as a Navy MH-60S Seahawk helicopter settled onto the hospital's front lawn, crushing the decorative fountain and sending water spraying in every direction. Its rotors kicked up a storm of debris and noise that turned the ER into a hurricane zone. The side door slammed open and 8 figures dropped out, moving with the kind of precision that only came from one place. They wore black tactical gear, faces obscured, weapons holstered but visible. The lead operator, 6'2", shoulders like a linebacker, scanned the room with cold efficiency. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Where is Petty Officer Elena Marsh?" The ER went silent. Chen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Patricia looked like she might faint. The security guards actually stepped away from Elena, their hands dropping from her arms. The operator's eyes found Elena, and despite the balaclava, she could see recognition. He crossed the distance in 4 strides. "Petty Officer Marsh, we have a situation." Elena's posture shifted imperceptibly, shoulders back, chin up, the civilian mask falling away to reveal something harder underneath. "I'm no longer active duty, Commander." "You are now. Presidential authorization. We need you airborne in 3 minutes." Chen finally found his voice. "What the hell is going on? Who are you people? This is a hospital. You can't just—" The commander turned to face Chen, and whatever Chen saw in those eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and be quiet. This is a matter of national security." He turned back to Elena. Senator Castellano's convoy hit an IED on Route 7. His son took shrapnel to the femoral artery. He's on life support in our mobile unit, but he's bleeding out. You're the only surgical nurse within 200 miles who's certified in battlefield vascular repair. Elena's mind was already shifting gears, running through protocols she hadn't used since Afghanistan. "How long has he been down?" 35 minutes. We've controlled the bleed twice. It keeps reopening." "Then you're using the wrong approach. I need my kit from my car, locker 247, and I need any O-negative blood this hospital has that they can spare." The commander nodded and gestured to 2 of his team members. "You heard her. Move." Patricia stepped forward, her voice shaking. She's been suspended. Security was escorting her." "Ma'am." The commander's tone was respectful but immovable. "Petty Officer Marsh holds a Level 3 clearance and is being activated under emergency military authority. Her civilian employment status is not relevant to this operation." He turned back to Elena. "Your kit. What am I looking for?" "Black Pelican case, marked with medical tape crosses. It's in my trunk. 2018 Honda Civic, Section C of the parking garage." Another nod, another team member dispatched. The ER staff stood frozen, watching as their quiet nurse transformed into something none of them recognized. Danielle's phone was still out, still recording, capturing every second of the impossible scene. Chen stepped forward again, his face red. "This is ridiculous. She's a nurse here. She's under my authority. I'm filing a complaint with—" The commander cut him off with a single gesture. "Sir, for your own safety and the safety of this facility, I'm going to need you to stand down, right now." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the implied threat, made Chen go pale. He backed up, hands raised, finally understanding that this was bigger than his ego, bigger than his little kingdom. Patricia found her courage. "Elena? You're military?" "Was," Elena said quietly. "Medical discharge 2022. She was a lot more than that." The commander's voice held something that might have been pride. "Petty Officer Marsh is one of 3 people in the entire Navy who successfully performed a battlefield arterial graft under fire. She saved 23 lives in conditions that would make your worst day in this ER look like a spa visit. And right now, she's the only chance that kid has." The team members returned, one with Elena's Pelican case, another with 6 units of blood requisitioned from the hospital's supply. The commander checked his watch. 2 minutes, Petty Officer. Can you work in a moving bird?" Elena took her case, popped it open, and ran her fingers over the instruments inside, all exactly where she'd left them, maintained with obsessive care even though she'd sworn she'd never use them again. Yes, sir. Then let's move. Elena turned to look at the ER one last time. At Chen, whose world had just been thoroughly destroyed. At Patricia, who looked confused and hurt. At Danielle, still recording, probably already planning her TikTok caption. At the other nurses and residents, the ones who'd spent 6 months treating her like she was less than nothing. She should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. The patient in Bay 7, she said to Patricia. Stephanie Morrison. Make sure they fix her spleen, not just the bleeding, and find her daughter, Emma. 7 years old, pink backpack. She'll need someone with her when she wakes up. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. Elena, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. You didn't ask, Elena said simply. None of you ever asked. She walked toward the helicopter, her team falling in around her with the practiced ease of people who'd worked together before. The rotors were already spinning up, the pilot ready for immediate departure. Chen's voice followed her. You can't just leave. You're in the middle of a disciplinary hearing. I'm calling the hospital board. I'm calling the police. The commander paused at the helicopter door and turned back. His voice carried easily over the rotor noise, amplified by some quality that made everyone freeze. Dr. Chen, that woman you just tried to fire? She holds 2 Navy Crosses, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart with 3 clusters. She survived 4 IED attacks, 2 helicopter crashes, and a firefight that killed everyone else in her unit. She has personally performed surgery in conditions that would make you piss yourself. And you made her clean toilets. He let that sink in for a moment. If I were you, I'd spend the next few hours reconsidering your life choices. Because when Petty Officer Marsh comes back, and she will come back, she's going to have a very interesting conversation with your hospital board about hostile work environments and discrimination against veterans. And I'm going to personally make sure every news outlet in Colorado hears about it. He hauled himself into the helicopter. Elena was already strapping in, opening her case, preparing for whatever fresh hell waited in the mobile unit. The commander slapped the bulkhead twice, and the Seahawk lifted off, rotor wash turning the ER into chaos one more time. Through the window, Elena watched Mercy Point General Hospital shrink below her. She watched Chen standing in the wreckage of the fountain, surrounded by soaked staff and broken tile. She watched Danielle still holding her phone up, capturing everything. And she thought about Stephanie Morrison, who might live because Elena had been willing to lose everything. About Emma, who might get to keep her mother. About all the times in the last 6 months when she'd wanted to quit, wanted to walk away, wanted to stop pretending to be small. The commander's voice in her headset. Good to have you back, Doc. Elena strapped into her harness, checked her instruments one more time, and let herself smile. Really smile, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Good to be back, Commander. Now tell me everything about this bleeder, and tell me fast. The helicopter banked hard toward Route 7, toward whatever disaster waited there, toward the only kind of work that had ever made sense to Elena Marsh, saving lives that protocols said were already lost, fighting battles that common sense said were unwinnable. Below, in the ER, the staff stood in shocked silence, finally understanding that the quiet nurse they'd tormented for 6 months had been a weapon the entire time. They just hadn't been smart enough to recognize it. The Seahawk cut through Colorado sky like a blade, the mountains below reduced to jagged shadows in the late morning sun. Elena's hands moved on autopilot, inventorying her kit while her mind ran tactical calculations she hadn't needed in 3 years. The commander, she recognized him now, Lieutenant Commander Wade Bishop, SEAL Team 3, sat across from her, his tactical headset connecting him to multiple channels simultaneously. Patient is Michael Castellano, age 19, sophomore at Georgetown, Bishop said, his voice clinical. Convoy was returning from a veterans event in the mountains when the device detonated. 3 casualties total, 1 DOA, 1 stable, and the senator's son with catastrophic vascular damage to the right femoral artery. Elena pulled out her vascular clamps, checking each one for function. Shrapnel pattern? Upward trajectory, multiple fragments. Our medic got primary hemostasis, but the artery keeps tearing. He's gone through 8 units already. Then your medic is using temporary measures on a permanent problem, Elena said, already visualizing the surgery. Femoral arteries don't just tear randomly. The shrapnel probably created multiple weak points. Every time you clamp one leak, blood pressure opens another. Bishop nodded. That's what Chief Petty Officer Harrison said. He also said if we didn't get you in the next 20 minutes, the kid was going to bleed out no matter what we did. Harrison. Elena felt something tight in her chest ease slightly. Ryan Harrison had trained her in battlefield surgery, had stood beside her in a field hospital in Kandahar when a mortar barrage had killed the surgeon and left them with 40 casualties and no backup. If Harrison said the situation was critical, it was worse than critical. ETA? She asked. 4 minutes. We set up a mobile surgical unit in a cleared section of highway. It's not pretty, but it's sterile. Elena looked out the window at the landscape rushing past. Not pretty was relative. She'd performed thoracic surgery in a sandstorm once, her hands inside a Marine's chest while the wind threatened to flip their tent. She'd amputated a leg using a Leatherman and morphine because their surgical tools had been destroyed in a helicopter crash. Pretty didn't save lives. Skill and determination did. The Seahawk began its descent, and Elena caught her first glimpse of Route 7. 3 military vehicles formed a perimeter around a white medical tent that had been erected in the middle of the highway. Traffic had been diverted, creating an eerie emptiness on the usually busy mountain road. State police cars blocked both directions, their lights still flashing. And in the center of it all, the tent, with figures moving in and out with urgent purpose. They touched down 50 feet from the tent. Elena was moving before the skids fully settled, her kit in one hand, the blood units clutched against her chest with the other. Bishop and his team formed up around her, not escorting, she realized, but protecting. Whatever had hit the convoy, they weren't certain it was the only threat. She ducked through the tent flap and was immediately transported back to Afghanistan. The smell hit her first, blood, an antiseptic, and fear. The universal scent of emergency medicine. The space was cramped, dominated by a surgical table where a young man lay unconscious, his right leg exposed and wrapped in blood-soaked gauze. Monitors beeped frantically. An IV pump pushed fluids. And standing over the patient, his hands inside the wound, was Ryan Harrison. Harrison looked up, and despite the surgical mask, Elena could see the relief in his eyes. Thank Christ. I've got my finger on this artery, and I don't dare move it. Elena dropped her kit and was scrubbing her hands in 10 seconds flat, muscle memory overriding thought. A Navy corpsman helped her into a sterile gown and gloves. She moved to the table and assessed the situation with a glance that cataloged everything. The patient's vital signs, BP 80/50, heart rate 140, oxygen saturation 92%, the amount of blood on the floor, at least 3 liters, maybe 4, and the improvised surgical field that Harrison had created under conditions that would make most civilian surgeons refuse to operate. Talk to me, Elena said, leaning in to examine the wound. Shrapnel entered here. Harrison indicated a ragged tear in Michael Castellano's thigh. And fragmented. I've removed 4 pieces, but there are at least 3 more I can feel but can't reach without risking the artery. The main vessel has 2 confirmed tears. One I'm holding now, another 2 centimeters proximal that keeps opening every time I try to repair the first. Elena could see it. The artery was shredded, damaged beyond simple suturing. You're going to need a graft. I know, but I don't have graft material. I don't have a vascular surgeon, and I don't have time. Kid's been compensating for 47 minutes. He crashes in the next 10. He's not coming back. Elena opened her kit and pulled out a vascular graft set. Sterile synthetic material designed for exactly this kind of battlefield repair. Harrison's eyes widened. You carry grafts in your personal kit? I carry everything, Elena said, already preparing the synthetic vessel. Because I learned from you that hoping for the best is how people die. Now, on my count, you're going to release pressure, and I'm going to clamp above and below the damaged section. We'll have maybe 30 seconds before his pressure crashes completely. Harrison nodded. Around them, the corpsmen moved into position, ready to push medications, ready to start CPR if needed, ready for the controlled disaster that battlefield surgery always was. Elena positioned her clamps. 3, 2, 1. Release. Harrison pulled his hand back. Blood fountained from the artery, not a leak, but a geyser. And Elena moved. Her hands were steady, impossibly steady, as she clamped above the tear, then below it. The blood flow stopped. Michael Castellano's blood pressure immediately dropped to 65/40. Push vasopressors, Elena said calmly, and hang another 2 units. Her hands moved with precision, born from repetition, from countless surgeries performed under conditions that defied logic. She cut away the damaged section of artery, her scalpel finding the clean tissue that would hold sutures. The synthetic graft went in millimeter by millimeter, each stitch perfect, each knot exactly tight enough to hold but not tear. The tent flap opened, and a man in an expensive suit burst in, his face pale and streaked with tears. "That's my son. Is he going to live? Tell me he's going to live." "Sir, you need to step back," Bishop said, intercepting the man. Senator Castellano, Elena realized, recognizing him from news broadcasts. "Don't you dare tell me to step back. That's my boy. Michael. Michael, can you hear me?" The senator's voice was climbing toward hysteria, and Elena didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it. She kept her eyes on her work, on the delicate anastomosis that would connect synthetic graft to living tissue. "Senator," Harrison said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even politicians listen, "if you want your son to live, you need to leave this tent right now and let Petty Officer Marsh work." "Petty Officer? You put my son's life in the hands of a nurse?" Elena's jaw tightened, but her hands never wavered. First stitch complete, second, third. The graft was taking shape, the connection forming. "Senator Castellano," a woman's voice, cool and controlled. Elena glanced up to see a tall woman in a dark suit, Secret Service, probably, gently but firmly guiding the senator toward the exit. "These are the best combat medics in the Navy. Your son is in excellent hands." The senator allowed himself to be led away, but his anguished voice carried back. "He's 19. He's just a kid. I can't lose him." Elena understood that pain. Every military medic did. The desperate bargaining of people watching their loved ones balanced on the knife edge between life and death. But understanding didn't mean she could afford to be distracted by it. "Proximal anastomosis complete," she said. "Harrison, I need you to prep for distal while I check for additional tears." Harrison moved into position. They'd done this dance before, in places that smelled like smoke and diesel, with mortars falling close enough to make the surgical light swing. The tent, the highway, the mountains, all of it faded away until there was only the patient, the artery, and the work. Elena ran her gloved fingers along the vessel, feeling for damage her eyes couldn't see. There. Another tear, small but growing, probably from a fragment that had scored the vessel wall without penetrating. She marked it with a surgical marker. "We've got a third site," she said. "Anterior wall, 2 centimeters distal to the main damage." "Can you patch it?" Elena examined the tear. It was small enough for a direct repair, but the tissue around it was bruised and fragile. Sutures might hold, or they might tear through and create a bigger problem. "I'm going to try," she said, threading the finest suture in her kit. "But if this doesn't hold, we're looking at a longer graft." The next 5 minutes were silent except for the beeping monitors and Elena's quiet instructions to the corpsmen. Every stitch had to be perfect. Every knot had to be exactly right. One mistake, one moment of imperfection, and Michael Castellano would bleed out on a highway in the Colorado mountains. Elena's back ached. Her shoulders burned. She'd been awake for 19 hours straight, had spent the last 6 months being treated like she was disposable, and now she was performing surgery that would challenge a vascular specialist in a state-of-the-art OR. But her hands didn't shake. They never shook when it mattered. "Distal anastomosis complete," she said finally. "Harrison, release your clamp first, then I'll release mine. We'll see if this holds." Harrison released. Blood flowed into the graft, testing the sutures. Elena watched for leaks, for any sign that her work was failing. Nothing. The graft held. "Releasing proximal clamp," she said, and opened the vessel. Blood pressure immediately began to rise. 70/45, 75/48, 82/52. Michael Castellano's foot, which had been pale and cool, began to pink up as circulation returned. Elena watched the monitors like a hawk, waiting for the crash that would indicate hidden bleeding. Another tear, something she'd missed. But the numbers kept climbing. 90 over 55, 95 over 58. Heart rate began to slow from its panicked sprint. Oxygen saturation crept upward. "We've got distal pulses," one of the corpsmen said, checking Michael's foot. Strong and regular. Elena allowed herself to breathe. "Finish the closure. I want him in a real hospital in the next 30 minutes. This repair is solid, but he needs proper imaging and monitoring." Harrison looked at her across the table, and she could see the respect in his eyes, the acknowledgement from one combat medic to another that she'd just done something extraordinary. "That was textbook Marsh," he said. "Textbook." Elena stripped off her gloves and gown, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the bone-deep fatigue of someone who'd been running on fumes for too long. "It was textbook you, Harrison. You taught me that technique. I taught you the basics. You made it art." Outside the tent, Elena could hear the senator's voice raised in urgent conversation, probably demanding updates. She needed to brief him, needed to explain the surgery and the prognosis and all the things that came after the immediate crisis. But first she needed a minute to remember how to be human again instead of a surgical instrument. Bishop appeared at her elbow with a bottle of water. "Hell of a thing to watch," he said. "The senator wants to thank you personally." Elena drank half the bottle in one pull. "The senator can thank me by making sure his son follows post-op protocols and doesn't try to play hero too soon." "I'll pass that along." Bishop paused. "We need to talk about what happens next." "Next is I go back to Mercy Point and finish getting fired," Elena said tiredly. "Chen was pretty clear about that." "Negative. You're not going anywhere near that hospital until we sort out the chain of command issues." Elena looked up sharply. "What chain of command issues?" Bishop pulled out his phone and showed her a video. Elena recognized Danielle's TikTok account, and there, playing for the entire internet to see, was the scene from the ER. Chen screaming at Elena. Security grabbing her, Elena performing CPR despite orders to stop. And then the Seahawk landing, the operators emerging, the commander's speech about Elena's service record. The video had been posted 47 minutes ago. It already had 2 million views and was climbing. "You're viral," Bishop said, "and not in a good way for Mercy Point General. The comments are, let's say they're not kind to Dr. Chen." Elena scrolled through the comments, her stomach sinking with each one. "They made a war hero clean toilets? This hospital needs to be investigated immediately. Doctor, Chen should lose his license for this. The way she just saved that patient and then saved a senator's son, and they fired her? I'm calling the medical board. This is discrimination against veterans." The video cut off just as Elena was boarding the helicopter, but someone had already posted a follow-up. Footage from a news helicopter showing the emergency surgery setup on Route 7, with a breathless reporter explaining that the same nurse fired from Mercy Point General just saved Senator Castellano's son using battlefield surgical techniques. "Oh no," Elena said softly. "Oh yes," Bishop replied. "You're a hero again, whether you want to be or not. And Mercy Point is about to have a very bad week." Senator Castellano chose that moment to enter the tent, his expensive suit rumpled and stained, his eyes red. He looked at Elena with an expression that combined gratitude and guilt in equal measure. "They told me what you did," he said hoarsely. "They said you grafted his artery, that without you, Michael would have died." Elena stood, suddenly aware of how small the tent was, how there was nowhere to hide from this conversation. "Your son is stable, Senator. He'll need surgery to remove the remaining shrapnel and proper vascular imaging, but the immediate crisis is resolved." "I need to know something." Castellano stepped closer. "Is it true, what that SEAL said back at the hospital, that you were fired, that they made you—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Elena chose her words carefully. "There was a disagreement about patient care protocols, Senator. The details aren't important." "The hell they aren't." Castellano's voice hardened with something Elena recognized as political rage, the kind that got bills passed and careers ended. "You saved my son's life after being humiliated and dismissed, I want names. I want to know exactly who treated you that way. Senator, with respect, I don't need you to fight my battles. This isn't about fighting your battles, petty officer. This is about a hospital that discriminates against veterans, that wastes talented medical personnel on menial tasks, and that apparently values hierarchy over patient care. He pulled out his own phone. I've already received 47 calls from constituents who saw that video. The governor's office has called twice. The state medical board is opening an investigation. Whether you want this fight or not, it's already started. Elena felt trapped, pinned between her desire for privacy and the reality that she'd become a symbol for something bigger than herself. I just want to do my job, Senator. Then help me make sure you can. Castellano's voice softened. My son is alive because you were willing to lose everything to save a patient. That kind of courage shouldn't be punished. It should be rewarded. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and saw 17 missed calls. Patricia, hospital administration, 3 unknown numbers, and one from her former commanding officer at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. There were also 43 text messages, most from people she hadn't spoken to in years. One message stood out from Patricia. Elena, please call me. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're saying Chen is suspended pending investigation. This is getting out of control. Out of control. Elena almost laughed. 6 months of control, of being small and quiet and invisible, and the moment she'd stood up for a patient, the entire house of cards had collapsed. I need to make some calls, she said. Bishop nodded. We'll transport the senator's son to Denver Memorial, best trauma center in the state. You should come with us. Make sure the handoff is smooth. It wasn't a suggestion, Elena realized. It was an order, dressed up in polite language. Bishop wasn't going to let her disappear back to Mercy Point, wasn't going to let her fade into the background again. The Navy had reclaimed her, at least temporarily, and there were protocols to follow. The flight to Denver took 20 minutes. Elena spent it in the back of the Seahawk with Michael Castellano, monitoring his vitals, adjusting his medications, doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept critical patients stable. He was still unconscious, his young face peaceful despite the trauma his body had endured. 19 years old. The same age as some of the Marines she'd treated in Afghanistan, kids who'd enlisted thinking war was glory and found out it was blood and screaming and desperate prayers. Senator Castellano sat across from her, watching his son with an expression that Elena had seen on too many parents' faces. The math was always the same. How many minutes until safety? How many heartbeats until the crisis passed? How many prayers until you could breathe again? How did you end up at Mercy Point? The senator asked suddenly. With your record, you could work anywhere. Elena kept her eyes on the monitors. I needed a place that didn't ask too many questions. About what? About why a Navy medic with combat decorations was discharged instead of promoted. Castellano was quiet for a moment. The commander mentioned a classified incident. It's still classified, Senator, which means I can't talk about it, and you shouldn't ask. But Castellano was a politician, which meant he couldn't resist pushing. Can you tell me if it was justified, your discharge? Elena thought about Kandahar, about the decision she'd made in a firefight that saved 32 lives and ended her career, about the classified report that praised her actions while simultaneously declaring her unfit for continued service, about the contradictions that had defined her entire military experience. I'd do it again, she said finally. That's all that matters. They landed at Denver Memorial to a circus. News crews had somehow gotten wind of the situation and were camped outside the hospital's helipad. Cameras swung toward them as the Seahawk touched down. Reporters shouted questions that were swallowed by rotor wash. Stay close, Bishop said in Elena's ear. We're not stopping for interviews. But the reporters weren't interested in her, not yet. They swarmed Senator Castellano asking about his son, about the attack, about whether this was terrorism or an accident. Castellano handled them with practiced ease, deflecting questions while Bishop's team efficiently moved Michael Castellano into the hospital. Elena tried to slip away in the chaos, but a hand caught her arm. She turned to find a woman in scrubs, attending physician based on the ID badge, looking at her with sharp interest. You're Elena Marsh, the woman said. It wasn't a question. I need to ensure my patient is properly handed off, Elena replied, trying to move past. Already done, Dr. Reeves from vascular surgery is taking over. The woman didn't release Elena's arm. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief of Emergency Medicine. No relation to Marcus Chen, thank God. I saw the video, and I saw your surgical notes from the field operation. Harrison transmitted them ahead. Elena waited, knowing where this was going. We have an opening for a trauma nurse specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen continued. Someone with advanced training, combat experience, and the ability to make life or death decisions under pressure. The pay is triple what Mercy Point was paying you. You'd have autonomy, respect, and actual authority. Interested? It was everything Elena had wanted 6 months ago when she'd first applied to Mercy Point. Everything she'd been denied because her discharge status raised red flags, because hospitals preferred nurses who followed orders without question, because being extraordinary in the military made you suspect in civilian life. I can't, Elena said. I'm still technically employed at Mercy Point pending a disciplinary hearing. Then let me make a call. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone. I sit on the state medical board. I can fast-track your separation from Mercy Point and have you credentialed here by end of week. Why? Elena asked bluntly. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm actually good at my job or if I just got lucky today. Dr. Chen smiled. I know Ryan Harrison. He called me 20 minutes ago and said if I didn't hire you immediately, I was the biggest fool in Colorado. Harrison doesn't give recommendations lightly, and neither do I. She held out her hand. What do you say? Elena looked at the offered hand, at the woman who represented everything she'd been denied for 6 months. A chance. Respect. The opportunity to be herself instead of a smaller, quieter version designed to avoid conflict. She took the hand and shook it. I say I need 72 hours to tie up loose ends. Done. Report Monday morning, 0600. We'll have your credentials ready. Dr. Chen turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. That senator whose son you saved? He's already drafting legislation about veteran employment protections in healthcare. You're going to be famous, whether you want to be or not. Might as well be famous somewhere that appreciates you. Dr. Chen disappeared into the hospital, leaving Elena standing on the helipad as the news crews finally realized who she was and turned their cameras in her direction. Ms. Marsh, can you comment on the video? Is it true you were fired for saving a patient? What was it like performing surgery on a highway? Bishop materialized at her side again, his presence making the reporters take an involuntary step back. No comment. Petty Officer Marsh needs medical evaluation after a high-stress operation. Please respect her privacy. He guided her inside, past security, into a quiet hallway where the noise of the news crews finally faded. Elena leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much her hands were starting to shake now that the adrenaline had fully worn off. You okay? Bishop asked. I'm used to being invisible, Elena said quietly. This is the opposite of invisible. Yeah, well, invisibility is overrated. Trust me on that. Elena's phone buzzed again. Another text from Patricia. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. They're demanding you attend. Elena, please, we need to talk about this. And then another message, this one from an unknown number. This is Dr. Marcus Chen. We need to discuss what happened this morning before this situation escalates further. I'm willing to admit there may have been miscommunication. Call me. Elena showed the message to Bishop, who read it and snorted. Miscommunication. That's what he's calling it. Not discrimination, not abuse of power, but miscommunication. He's trying to control the narrative before it destroys him, Elena said. Smart. Too bad for him that the narrative is already out there. Bishop glanced at his watch. I need to debrief with my team. You should get some rest. We have quarters here for situations like this. I'm going back to Mercy Point, Elena interrupted. Bishop looked at her like she was crazy. Why would you do that? You've got a job offer at a better hospital. You've got the entire internet on your side, and you've got a senator ready to burn Mercy Point to the ground. Going back there just gives Chen another chance to spin this his way. I have a patient there, Elena said. Stephanie Morrison. I need to know if she survived surgery. Understanding crossed Bishop's face. The woman you defied orders to save. She has a daughter, Emma, 7 years old. I need to know if I kept that promise. Bishop studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll drive you. but we're doing this on my terms. You don't go in alone. You don't engage with Chen unless absolutely necessary, and if things get hostile, we leave. Clear? Clear. The drive back to Copper Valley took 90 minutes through mountain roads that were starting to fill with afternoon traffic. Bishop drove a black SUV with tinted windows, maintaining the kind of situational awareness that never fully turned off, even in peacetime. Elena spent the drive staring out the window, watching the mountains give way to foothills. Then to the valley where Mercy Point General sat like a judgment. Her phone continued its relentless buzzing. More messages, more calls, more demands for her attention. She ignored all of them except one, a text from Harrison. "You did good work today, Marsh, real good. Don't let the brass take that away from you." They pulled into Mercy Point's parking lot at 3:47 p.m., and Elena immediately knew something had changed. The usual quiet of the employee entrance was replaced by a cluster of people, hospital staff mostly, standing in small groups and talking in urgent whispers. When Elena stepped out of the SUV, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to stare. "Stay close," Bishop murmured. They walked toward the entrance, and the crowd parted like water around stone. Elena kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the weight of their gazes, could hear the whispered commentary. "That's her. I can't believe we treated her like that. Did you see what Chen said in his statement? Absolute bullshit." Inside, the ER was subdued. The usual chaos had been replaced by an eerie quiet, like everyone was waiting for a storm that hadn't quite arrived yet. Patricia saw Elena first and rushed over, her face a mixture of relief and stress. "Elena, thank God, we need to talk. Privately." Patricia led them to a small conference room away from the main floor. Once the door closed, she turned to Elena with desperate eyes. "The board suspended Chen this afternoon, pending investigation. Danielle's video has gone viral. I mean, really viral, like national news viral. We've had 3 different news crews camped outside demanding interviews. The state medical board called twice, and Senator Castellano's office issued a statement saying you saved his son's life after being unjustly terminated for advocating for patient safety." Patricia's hands were shaking. "Elena, this is a disaster for everyone." "How's Stephanie Morrison?" Elena asked. Patricia blinked, thrown by the change of subject. "What?" "Stephanie Morrison, Base 7, internal bleeding. How is she?" She's alive. Surgery repaired a lacerated spleen and liver damage. She's in ICU, stable condition. Her daughter is with her grandmother." Patricia sat down heavily. "You saved her life. If you hadn't pushed for that imaging, hadn't done that ultrasound." She trailed off. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Stephanie was alive. Emma still had a mother. That, at least, had been worth it. "The board wants to meet with you tomorrow," Patricia continued. "They're talking about... I don't know what they're talking about, honestly. Reinstatement? Apology? Chen is threatening legal action against the hospital for wrongful suspension. Danielle's been placed on administrative leave for violating patient privacy by posting that video. The whole thing is a mess." "What do you want from me?" Elena asked quietly. Patricia looked up, tears in her eyes. "I want to understand why you never told us. Why you never said you were military, that you had all that training, that you were... God, Elena, you have a Navy Cross. You're a genuine war hero, and we had you cleaning bathrooms." "Because I needed to be someone else for a while," Elena said. "I needed to be small and quiet and invisible. The Navy made me large and loud and very, very visible, and it nearly destroyed me." "What happened?" Patricia whispered. Bishop stepped forward. "That's classified, ma'am, and not relevant to the current situation." Patricia nodded, accepting the deflection. "The board meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. They're going to ask you about your conduct, about Chen's treatment of you, about everything. Elena, I think they're going to offer you whatever you want to make this go away quietly." "I don't want anything from Mercy Point," Elena said. "I've already accepted a position at Denver Memorial." Patricia's face fell. "Oh, of course. That makes sense." She stood, smoothing her scrubs. "I'm sorry, Elena. I should have asked, should have paid more attention, should have..." She couldn't finish. Elena stood and faced Patricia directly. "You were kind to me when others weren't. You stood up for me more than once. That matters, but not enough. No, Elena agreed. Not enough, but more than most. They left Patricia in the conference room and headed back toward the ER. Elena had planned to leave immediately, but she found her feet carrying her toward the ICU instead. Bishop followed without comment, his presence a solid wall between her and anyone who might try to stop her. The ICU was quiet, all beeping monitors and hushed voices. Elena found Stephanie Morrison in bed 4, connected to multiple lines and monitors but breathing on her own, her color better than it had been in Bay 7. An older woman sat beside the bed, holding Stephanie's hand, the grandmother probably. Elena stood in the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but the grandmother looked up and saw her, and something in her expression, recognition, maybe, or gratitude, made Elena step into the room. "You're the nurse," the grandmother said softly. "The one who saved her life. They told me about you, about how you defied orders." I just did my job, ma'am." "Your job was to let my daughter die." The grandmother's voice was matter of fact, not accusatory. "That Dr. Chen, he told me himself, said the resources weren't available, said she was stable enough to wait, said you went against protocol." She stood, still holding Stephanie's hand. "My granddaughter Emma is 7 years old. She's downstairs with her aunt right now, waiting to see if her mother is going to wake up. Because of you, I get to tell Emma that yes, Mommy is going to be okay, that she's going to come home." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I'm glad she's stable." "Stable," the grandmother laughed softly, sadly. Such a clinical word for a miracle. She looked at Elena with sharp eyes. "I saw the video. I know what they did to you. I know you lost your job saving my daughter." "I didn't lose my job for that," Elena said. "I lost it for being unwilling to pretend that protocols matter more than people." Behind her, Bishop's phone buzzed urgently. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something hard and professional. "We need to go," he said quietly. "Now." Elena turned to look at him. "What's wrong?" Chen just posted his own statement. You need to see this." They left the ICU and Bishop pulled up Chen's statement on his phone. Elena read it, her jaw tightening with each word. "While I appreciate the concern for patient care, I want to clarify the events of this morning. Nurse Elena Marsh's actions, while well-intentioned, violated multiple hospital protocols and potentially endangered patients. Her decision to perform procedures without physician authorization created significant liability issues for Mercy Point General. While I sympathize with her transition from military to civilian medicine, our hospital protocols exist for patient safety, and no employee, regardless of their background, is exempt from following them. I hope this incident serves as a learning opportunity about the importance of professional boundaries in healthcare." The statement was perfect, professionally worded, seemingly reasonable, designed to make Elena look reckless and insubordinate while painting Chen as a defender of proper medical practice. "Son of a bitch," Bishop said. "He's trying to flip the narrative." Elena handed back the phone. "It's smart. Make it about protocols instead of discrimination. Make me the problem instead of him." "Except everyone saw the video. They know what really happened." "They saw what Danielle chose to show them," Elena corrected. "They didn't see the 6 months before that. They didn't see the systematic dismissal, the deliberate humiliation. Chen's betting that by the time the investigation is complete, the public will have moved on to the next viral sensation." Bishop's expression was grim. "So what are you going to do?" Elena thought about Stephanie Morrison, alive because Elena had refused to follow orders. About Michael Castellano, alive because she'd maintained her skills even when no one wanted them. About every patient she'd saved in 6 years of military medicine, every life preserved because she'd been willing to fight for them. She thought about being small, being quiet, being invisible, and she was done with all of it. "I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow," she said, "and I'm going to tell them exactly what happened. All of it, on record." Bishop smiled slowly. "Now you're talking. Want some company?" "I thought you were only here for the senator's son." "Consider it personal interest," Bishop replied. "I've got a thing about watching bullies get what's coming to them. Besides, Harrison would never forgive me if I let you walk into that meeting alone." They were heading back toward the exit when a voice called out, "Marsh, wait!" Elena turned to find Danielle Frost hurrying toward her, still in scrubs despite being on leave. Her perfect makeup was smudged, her hair less than pristine. She looked scared. "I need to talk to you," Danielle said, slightly out of breath. "Please." Bishop moved to intercept, but Elena held up a hand. "It's okay." Danielle glanced at Bishop nervously, then back to Elena. I need to apologize. For posting that video, I didn't think about patient privacy, about how it would blow up like this. I just thought—" She trailed off. "You thought you'd get TikTok famous," Elena said flatly. "Congratulations, 2 million views and counting." "I didn't mean for you to lose your job. I swear, I was just trying to—" Danielle stopped, seeming to realize how hollow her excuses sounded. "I'm sorry. That's what I came to say. I'm really, genuinely sorry." Elena studied the woman who'd made her life miserable for 6 months, who'd gleefully reported her for insubordination, who'd treated her like garbage because it was entertaining. She saw fear in Danielle's eyes now, fear of consequences, of professional ruin, of being the villain in a story that millions were watching. "Are you sorry you posted the video?" Elena asked. "Or sorry it had consequences you didn't expect?" Danielle flinched. "Both. I don't know. Does it matter?" "Yeah," Elena said. "It matters. Because one of those is regret for your actions. The other is just regret for getting caught." She walked away, leaving Danielle standing in the hallway. Behind her, she heard Danielle call out, "What should I do? Elena, please, what should I do?" Elena didn't turn around. "Learn from it, or don't. That's not my problem anymore." Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The news crews had finally dispersed, leaving the parking lot quiet. Elena stood beside Bishop's SUV and looked back at Mercy Point General, at the building where she'd spent 6 months pretending to be less than she was. "Tomorrow's going to be a circus," Bishop observed. "I know. You ready for it?" Elena thought about the question, really thought about it. Was she ready to stop being invisible, to step back into the light and accept everything that came with it? She thought about Stephanie Morrison's daughter, about Michael Castellano's second chance at life, about Harrison's text, "You did good work today, Marsh. Real good." "Yeah," she said finally. "I'm ready." Bishop opened the passenger door for her. "Then let's get you somewhere safe for the night, because tomorrow you're going to war." Elena climbed into the SUV, and as they pulled out of the parking lot, her phone buzzed one more time. A new text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Emma's grandmother. Thank you for saving my daughter. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you changed our whole world. You gave us our future back. That's worth everything." Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of gratitude, the reality of impact, the knowledge that choosing to act instead of obeying had saved lives that protocols would have sacrificed. Tomorrow, she'd face the board. Tomorrow, she'd confront Chen and his carefully constructed narrative. Tomorrow, she'd decide what kind of nurse, what kind of person she wanted to be. But tonight, she had this. The knowledge that she'd done the right thing, regardless of cost. The mountains faded behind them as Bishop drove toward Denver, toward whatever came next. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena Marsh wasn't running from her past. She was running toward her future. The Denver Safe House was a nondescript apartment in a building full of them, the kind of place where military personnel crashed between deployments or assignments. Bishop had made 2 calls and secured it within 15 minutes, complete with basic provisions and enough security to make Elena feel like she was being guarded instead of protected. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the small kitchen table reviewing the events of the day on her laptop, watching the story metastasize across social media in real time. Chen's statement had gained traction in certain circles, medical professionals concerned about protocol violations, hospital administrators worried about liability, conservative commentators framing it as another example of military personnel struggling to adapt to civilian life. But the counter-narrative was stronger, louder, and backed by something Chen couldn't manufacture. Video evidence of him screaming at a nurse who was trying to save a patient's life. By midnight, 3 major news networks had picked up the story. By 2 a.m., a hashtag was trending. #JusticeForMarsh. By 4 a.m., Elena had received interview requests from 63 different media outlets, including 2 from international news services. She ignored them all and focused on preparing for the board meeting. Patricia had forwarded her the official agenda, discussion of recent events and employment status of Elena Marsh, RN, along with a note that the hospital's legal team would be present. That detail alone told Elena everything she needed to know. Mercy Point was preparing for war, not reconciliation. At 5:47 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed a San Diego area code she recognized immediately. "Captain Hernandez?" Elena answered, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Petty Officer Marsh." Captain Olivia Hernandez had been Elena's commanding officer at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, the woman who'd signed her discharge papers with visible reluctance. "I hear you've had an interesting 24 hours. "That's one way to put it, ma'am." "I also hear you're walking into a board meeting this morning where a civilian hospital is going to try to hang you out to dry for doing exactly what we trained you to do." Hernandez paused. "I'm calling because I have information you need before you walk into that room." Elena sat up straighter. "What kind of information?" "The kind that's been sitting in a classified file for 3 years, waiting for the right moment." Hernandez's voice carried a weight that made Elena's pulse quicken. "Your discharge wasn't what you think it was, Elena. It was protective custody disguised as administrative separation." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "The incident in Kandahar. You were right. You saved 32 lives by making a call that contradicted direct orders from a superior officer. But what you don't know is that officer was under investigation for systematic negligence that had already resulted in 14 preventable deaths. Your actions exposed him, and he had friends in very high places who wanted you silenced." Elena's hands were shaking now, for the first time since the helicopter had landed. "You discharged me to protect me?" "We gave you an honorable discharge with full benefits and sealed your record to keep you out of the crossfire while JAG built their case. The officer in question was court-martialed 8 months ago, dishonorably discharged, stripped of pension, currently serving 10 years at Leavenworth." Hernandez's voice softened. "We couldn't tell you because the investigation was ongoing. But now that it's complete, and now that you're in the public eye again, you need to know the truth." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because in about 4 hours, you're going to sit across from people who are going to try to make you feel like you're the problem. Like speaking up and saving lives makes you insubordinate and dangerous. And I need you to walk into that room knowing that every time you've stood up for what's right, you've been proven correct. Every single time." Elena closed her eyes, processing 3 years of believing she'd been cast out for being too difficult, too uncompromising, too unwilling to play politics. "Can I use this information?" "The court-martial is public record now. The circumstances of your discharge remain classified, but I can confirm that you were honorably discharged and that your service record is exemplary. I'll be available by phone if you need me to speak to that hospital board." "Thank you, Captain." "Elena." Hernandez's use of her first name was deliberate, personal. "Stop hiding. The world needs nurses like you. People like you. Don't let bureaucrats and cowards convince you that doing the right thing is wrong." The call ended. Elena sat in the pre-dawn darkness, feeling something shift inside her. Not confidence exactly, but clarity. She'd spent 3 years believing she was broken, too damaged for civilian medicine, too uncompromising for the real world. But what if she wasn't broken? What if everyone else was just too comfortable with accepting preventable deaths as inevitable? Bishop emerged from the second bedroom at 6:30, already dressed in civilian clothes that somehow still screamed military. He took one look at Elena and said, "You didn't sleep. I had better things to do. You ready for this circus?" Elena thought about Hernandez's call, about Stephanie Morrison's daughter, about Michael Castellano getting a second chance at life. "Yeah, I'm ready." They arrived at Mercy Point General at 9:15 a.m., to find the parking lot packed with news vans and protesters, actual protesters, holding signs that read "Support our veterans" and "Fire Dr. Chen," and inexplicably, "Nurses save lives, doctors take credit." Someone had organized them overnight, turned Elena's personal conflict into a public cause. "This is insane," Elena muttered. "This is America. Bishop replied. Everyone loves a good hero story, especially when there's a clear villain. They pushed through the crowd, cameras tracking their movement, reporters shouting questions that Bishop deflected with practiced ease. Inside, the hospital was unnaturally quiet, staff moving through halls with the cautious energy of people waiting for an explosion. Patricia met them outside the conference room, her face drawn with stress and lack of sleep. Elena, they've been in there for an hour already. The legal team, the board, Chen and his lawyer. They're prepared. So am I. There's something you should know. Patricia glanced at Bishop, uncertain, then back to Elena. Chen brought documentation, personnel files showing every time you were late, every mistake in charting, every minor infraction. He's building a case that you were a problem employee from day one. Elena felt her jaw tighten. Those infractions were all from my first month, before I learned your specific documentation system. I know, but he's using them to establish a pattern of not following protocol. Patricia's voice dropped. Elena, they're going to try to destroy your credibility, make you look unstable, insubordinate. I thought you should be prepared. I appreciate the warning. The conference room door opened and a woman in an expensive suit emerged, hospital counsel based on her demeanor. She looked at Elena with the kind of assessment lawyers give potential liabilities. Miss Marsh, the board is ready for you now. She glanced at Bishop. Only Miss Marsh, please. Commander Bishop is here as my advocate, Elena said. Federal regulations allow veterans to have representation in employment proceedings. The lawyer's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Very well. This way. The conference room was designed for intimidation, a long table with the 7 board members seated on one side, a single chair positioned on the other facing them like a defendant at trial. Chen sat at the far end with his own lawyer, his expression carefully neutral. Patricia slipped in and took a seat against the wall, technically present but clearly not empowered to speak. The board chairman was a silver-haired man named Douglas Whitmore, a retired surgeon who now ran the hospital's oversight committee. He gestured to the empty chair. Ms. Marsh, please sit. Elena remained standing. I prefer to stand, thank you. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. This is an informal proceeding, Ms. Marsh. There's nothing informal about 7 board members, 2 lawyers, and a suspended physician sitting in judgment of my employment status. Elena's voice was calm but carried. So let's skip the pretense and address why we're really here. Chen's lawyer started to object, but Whitmore held up a hand. Very well. Miss Marsh, we're here to discuss your conduct on the morning of January 26th, specifically your decision to countermand Dr. Chen's medical orders and your subsequent unauthorized departure with military personnel. That's not why we're here, Elena said. We're here because a video went viral showing your chief resident verbally abusing a nurse, and now you're facing a public relations nightmare and potential legal liability. You want to know if I'm going to sue, if I'm going to talk to the media, if I'm going to turn this into something bigger than it already is. The room went silent. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, smiled slightly as if appreciating Elena's directness. Whitmore cleared his throat. Ms. Marsh, I understand you're upset about recent events, but I'm not upset. I'm factual. Elena pulled a folder from her bag, notes she'd compiled during the sleepless night. Let's review what actually happened. Stephanie Morrison arrived with internal bleeding that Dr. Chen assessed as non-critical. I performed an ultrasound that revealed significant hemorrhage. I called for emergency surgery. Dr. Chen refused and called security to have me removed. I performed CPR on Mrs. Morrison when she went into cardiac arrest. She survived surgery and is currently stable in ICU. You violated protocol, Chen started, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. Elena turned to face him directly. I violated your authority. There's a difference. The protocol for suspected internal bleeding is imaging and surgical consultation. I followed that protocol. You chose to ignore it because you were overwhelmed and didn't want to admit you'd made an error in triage. Chen's face flushed. You're a nurse. You don't make those determinations. Actually, I do. Colorado nursing law allows RNs with advanced certification to order diagnostic imaging in emergency situations. I have that certification. Elena looked back at the board. Dr. Chen didn't know that because he never bothered to review my credentials. He assumed because I was quiet and knew that I was inexperienced. He was wrong. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. Miss Marsh, your personnel file shows multiple instances of arriving late, incomplete charting, and all from my first 3 weeks of employment while I was learning Mercy Point's specific electronic charting system, Elena interrupted. After that adjustment period, my record is spotless. Dr. Chen included those early infractions to establish a pattern that doesn't exist. It's a deliberate misrepresentation designed to discredit me. Chen's lawyer spoke up, her voice smooth and professional. Ms. Marsh, you're painting yourself as the victim here, but the facts show a pattern of insubordination. You routinely question physician orders, you perform procedures without authorization, and on January 26th, you physically assaulted a patient against direct orders to cease. I performed CPR on a patient in cardiac arrest. That's not assault, that's basic emergency care. Care that Dr. Chen had determined was not indicated at that time. Elena turned to Chen's lawyer with cold precision. Are you seriously arguing that CPR on a patient in cardiac arrest is inappropriate care? The lawyer hesitated, realizing the trap. I'm arguing that you violated chain of command and created a hostile work environment by refusing to follow. I created a hostile work environment? Elena's voice cut like a scalpel. In the 6 months I worked here, I was ordered to clean toilets, fetch coffee, and handle tasks that had nothing to do with patient care. I was mocked for being quiet, excluded from training opportunities, and repeatedly assigned to menial work despite having more trauma experience than anyone else in that ER. That's hostile work environment. I simply refused to let it kill a patient. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Marsh, we understand there may have been some interpersonal conflicts, but that doesn't excuse— Let me ask you something, Elena interrupted. How many of you have read my actual service record? Not the redacted version in my employment file, but my full military record? Silence. Elena pulled out a document, her DD-214, the military discharge form that summarized her service. She slid it across the table. Elena Marsh, Hospital Corpsman, First Class, United States Navy, 6 years active duty, 4 combat deployments, 2 Iraq, 2 Afghanistan, 237 documented trauma cases, 94 battlefield surgeries performed, 2 Navy Crosses, 1 Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts. Honorably discharged. She paused. And before you ask, my discharge was not medical or psychological. It was administrative, related to a classified incident that resulted in a court-martial of my superior officer for criminal negligence. Chen's face went pale. His lawyer looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I have confirmation from my former commanding officer available by phone, Elena continued. Captain Olivia Hernandez can verify that my discharge was honorable and that the incident in question resulted in my superior officer being convicted and imprisoned. I was protecting patients then, just like I was protecting Stephanie Morrison 2 days ago. The only difference is that this time, there's video evidence. Dr. Okonkwo picked up the DD-214, reading it carefully. Ms. Marsh, if this is accurate, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, why didn't you include this information in your initial application? Because I was trying to escape being defined by military service. I wanted to be evaluated as a nurse, not as a veteran. I wanted to start over somewhere quiet, where I could practice medicine without politics or hierarchy or combat trauma. Elena's voice softened slightly. I was wrong. You can't escape who you are. And who I am is someone who won't watch people die because it's inconvenient to save them. Whitmore was reading the DD-214 now, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like awe. 2 Navy Crosses. Miss Marsh, do you understand how rare that is? I understand that it doesn't matter if I can't use that training to save lives in civilian medicine. But you did use it, Dr. Okonkwo said quietly. You saved Stephanie Morrison. You saved Senator Castellanos' son. You've been using it all along, haven't you? Every time you caught something the doctors missed, every time you prevented a complication, you were using advanced combat medical training while we had you cleaning bathrooms. Elena said nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. Chen finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. This is all very impressive, but it doesn't change the fact that she violated my direct orders and created a liability situation for this hospital. Her military service doesn't exempt her from following civilian medical protocols. You're right, Elena agreed. It doesn't, but Colorado nursing law does, and patient advocacy standards do, and basic medical ethics do. She pulled out another document. This is the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics. Provision 3 states, the nurse promotes, advocates for, and protects the rights, health, and safety of the patient. Not the physician, not the hospital. The patient. She slid it across to Chen. You ordered me to abandon a patient who was actively dying. I refused. That's not insubordination. That's ethical practice. And if you'd done your job correctly in the first place, none of this would have happened. Chen shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. How dare you question my medical judgment? I'm a physician. I have years of training and experience that you'll never Sit down, Dr. Chen. Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. Right now. Chen sat, but his hands were shaking with rage. His lawyer looked like she was reconsidering her retainer fee. Whitmore turned back to Elena. Ms. Marsh, what is it you want from this meeting? Elena had prepared for this question all night, had run through dozens of possible responses. But standing there, looking at the board members who held power over her professional future, she realized there was only one honest answer. I want you to acknowledge that I did the right thing, not the politically convenient thing, not the legally safe thing, but the right thing. I want you to acknowledge that Dr. Chen's treatment of me was discriminatory and created an environment where patient safety was compromised. And I want you to commit to ensuring that no other veteran, no other nurse, period, is put in a position where they have to choose between following orders and saving lives. That's it? Whitmore looked genuinely surprised. You're not asking for financial compensation, reinstatement, a formal apology? I've already accepted a position at Denver Memorial. I don't want to work somewhere that values hierarchy over outcomes. Elena glanced at Patricia, saw tears in her supervisor's eyes. But I do want the nurses who are still here to be protected. I want policies that empower them to advocate for patients without fear of retaliation. I want the next Elena Marsh who works here to be heard instead of silenced. Dr. Okonkwo was nodding. Two other board members were writing notes. Whitmore looked at Chen's lawyer and said, I think we need to confer privately. Miss Marsh, if you could step outside for a few minutes. Elena nodded and left the room, Bishop following. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You did good in there, Bishop said. Controlled, factual, powerful. You made them see you. I'm not sure that's enough. It's more than enough, trust me. They waited 20 minutes. Elena watched hospital staff walk past, saw the mixture of curiosity and respect in their eyes. No one mocked her now, no one dismissed her. Word had spread fast. The quiet nurse was a decorated war hero, and everything they thought they knew about her was wrong. Patricia emerged from the conference room, her face unreadable. They want you back inside. Elena returned to find the board's body language had shifted. Chen looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His lawyer was packing her briefcase with the air of someone abandoning a sinking ship. Whitmore stood. Ms. Marsh, the board has conferred and reached several decisions. First, we accept your resignation effective immediately with the understanding that you've accepted employment elsewhere. We'll provide a neutral reference and will not contest any unemployment or benefits claims. Elena nodded, expected. Second, we're terminating Dr. Marcus Chen's employment for cause, effective immediately. The investigation into his conduct will continue, and we'll be referring our findings to the state medical board. Chen exploded. What? You can't. This is insane. I'm the victim here. She violated... Dr. Chen, you had a nurse with advanced combat medical training cleaning toilets because she didn't laugh at your jokes, Dr. Okonkwo said coldly. You ignored her clinical assessments, verbally abused her, and nearly caused a patient death through negligence. The video evidence alone is damning, but we've also received statements from 17 other staff members corroborating a pattern of hostile behavior toward nurses and support staff. You're done here. Chen's lawyer put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. This is because of the publicity, because of that damn video. You're sacrificing me to appease the mob. We're holding you accountable for your actions, Whitmore said. There's a difference. Chen turned to Elena, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. You destroyed my career, you know that? Everything I worked for, everything I built, gone, because you couldn't follow simple orders. Elena met his eyes without flinching. I didn't destroy your career, Dr. Chen. I just stopped enabling it. You destroyed it yourself by treating people like they were beneath you and patients like they were inconveniences. I just made it visible. Chen looked like he wanted to say more, wanted to rage and argue and fight, but his lawyer was pulling him toward the door, whispering urgently about lawsuits and defamation. He left the room like a man walking to his execution, and Elena felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only tired relief that it was over. Whitmore cleared his throat. Ms. Marsh, there's one more thing. The board is implementing new protocols based on your recommendations. We're establishing a formal patient advocacy system that empowers nurses to escalate concerns without fear of retaliation. We're also creating mandatory training on veteran employment and anti-discrimination policies. He paused. We'd like to name it the Elena Marsh Patient Advocacy Initiative. If you'll permit us to use your name. Elena stared at him, genuinely shocked. Yes, of course. Good. We'll be announcing these changes at a press conference this afternoon. We'd like you to be there, but we understand if you'd prefer not to. I'll be there, Elena said. Those nurses deserve to know their hospital is changing. They deserve to feel protected. The meeting ended. Elena walked out into the hallway to find it packed with hospital staff, nurses mostly, but also residents and techs and support staff. They'd been waiting, listening, hoping. When they saw her, a few started clapping. Then more joined in. Within seconds, the entire hallway was applauding. Patricia pushed through the crowd and hugged Elena tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for fighting, for all of us. Danielle was there too, standing at the back, not clapping, but watching with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, Danielle mouthed something that looked like, I'm sorry. Elena nodded once, accepting without forgiving, and turned away. Bishop guided her through the crowd and outside, where the protesters cheered when they saw her. News cameras swung in their direction. Reporters shouted questions. Elena ignored them all and headed for Bishop's SUV. They were almost there when a voice called out, Ms. Marsh, wait! Elena turned to see Senator Castellano pushing through the crowd, flanked by Secret Service. He reached her, slightly out of breath, and said, I heard what happened in there. The board meeting. Your son, Senator, how is he? Stable. Awake. Asking for the nurse who saved his life. Castellano's eyes were red-rimmed but bright. I came to tell you in person, the legislation I mentioned, it's being fast-tracked. The Veterans Healthcare Employment Protection Act. It'll guarantee that hospitals can't discriminate against veterans, that they have to honor military medical training in credentialing decisions, and that nurses and medics with combat experience receive the respect and authority their skills deserve. That's more than I expected. It's less than you deserve. Castellano handed her a card. My direct number. I meant what I said about making sure this matters. You changed my family's life. I'm going to make sure your sacrifice changes the system. He left before Elena could respond, his security detail forming up around him. Bishop opened the SUV door and Elena climbed in, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Where to? Bishop asked. Denver Memorial. I start Monday. I should probably figure out where I'm going to live. They drove in silence for a while, leaving Copper Valley behind, heading toward the city and whatever came next. Elena's phone buzzed constantly. Messages of support, interview requests, job offers from hospitals across the country. She ignored them all until one message caught her eye. It was from Harrison. Told you that you were too good for that place. Denver's lucky to have you. Drinks when you're settled? She smiled and typed back. Definitely. And Harrison? Thanks for calling Bishop. The response came immediately. Didn't call him, he volunteered. Said he'd been looking for a good fight and you looked like you could use backup. Kid's got good instincts. Elena glanced at Bishop, who was focused on driving but had the slightest smile on his face. You volunteered for this? She asked. Harrison mentioned you were getting screwed over by a civilian hospital. I have strong feelings about people who abuse authority. Seemed like a good use of my leave time. You used your leave time to help a stranger? Bishop's smile widened. You're not a stranger, Marsh. You're family. Anyone who's been downrange, who's held the line when everyone else ran, that's family. We look out for our own. Elena felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built around herself to survive the last 3 years. She'd been so focused on being invisible, on not being defined by her military service, that she'd forgotten what it meant to belong to something bigger than herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what happens next." "What do you mean?" Bishop pulled up a news article on his phone and handed it to her. The headline read, "Hero Navy nurse fired for saving patient. Now every veteran organization in America wants her story." The article detailed interview requests from veterans of foreign wars, American Legion, Iraq, and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and a dozen other organizations. There were quotes from military medical personnel praising her, from patient advocacy groups demanding healthcare reform, from senators and representatives calling for investigations into hospital employment practices. "You're not just a nurse anymore," Bishop said. "You're a symbol. The veteran who got screwed over for doing the right thing, the woman who stood up to power and won. That's a story people need right now." Elena handed back the phone. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to save lives." "Too late. You're both." Bishop pulled into traffic heading toward Denver. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Elena watched the mountains pass by, thinking about Stephanie Morrison, about Michael Castellano, about every patient she'd fought for in 6 years of military medicine and 6 months of civilian humiliation. She thought about the nurses at Mercy Point who'd applauded her, about Patricia's tears, about the board creating new policies in her name. She thought about being invisible versus being seen, about hiding versus fighting, about accepting the world as it was versus forcing it to be better. "I'm going to use it," she said finally. "Every interview, every platform, every opportunity, I'm going to use it to make sure this matters, make sure it changes things." Bishop nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking like a warrior." They arrived at Denver Memorial an hour later. Dr. Sarah Chen was waiting at the entrance along with a small welcoming committee of emergency department staff. When Elena stepped out of the SUV, Chen strode forward with her hand extended. "Welcome to Denver Memorial, Ms. Marsh. We've prepared your credentials, assigned you a locker, and cleared you for orientation on Monday." She paused. "We've also designated you as our lead trauma specialist and given you authority to override attending physicians in life-threatening situations. It seemed appropriate given your background." Elena shook her hand, feeling the weight of that authority settle on her shoulders. This was what she'd wanted: respect, autonomy, the ability to practice medicine at the level she'd been trained for. But it came with responsibility, with visibility, with expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. "I won't let you down," she said. "I know you won't. That's why you're here." Dr. Chen gestured toward the hospital. "Want to see your new workspace?" Elena followed her inside, Bishop trailing behind as unofficial security. The emergency department at Denver Memorial was 3 times the size of Mercy Point's, with state-of-the-art equipment and a staff that moved with practiced efficiency. Nurses looked up as Elena passed, recognition in their eyes. They'd seen the video, heard the story, knew who she was. But instead of mockery or dismissal, Elena saw respect, curiosity. "Welcome." Dr. Chen led her to a private office, small but functional, with Elena's name already on the door. "This is yours. We don't usually give trauma specialists private offices, but given the media attention, we thought you might need a place to escape when it gets overwhelming." Elena stepped inside, taking in the desk, the computer, the window with a view of the Rockies, her own space, her own authority, the opposite of everything Mercy Point had been. "There's one more thing," Dr. Chen said. "A patient in Trauma Bay 2 requested to meet you. She saw the news coverage and asked specifically if you were the nurse who'd be working here." "A patient?" "Arrived this morning. MVA with suspected internal injuries. She's stable, but she's scared. She asked if the nurse who doesn't give up on people could check on her." Dr. Chen smiled. "Seems your reputation precedes you." Elena followed Dr. Chen to Trauma Bay 2, where a young woman lay connected to monitors, her face bruised but alert. She looked up when Elena entered and her eyes filled with tears. You're her, the nurse from the video. I'm Elena Marsh, yes. I'm Ashley. Ashley Rodriguez. The young woman's voice shook. I saw what you did. How you fought for that patient even when everyone told you to stop. And I thought if I could have a nurse like that, maybe I'd be okay. Elena stepped closer, automatically checking the monitors, assessing Ashley's condition with practiced efficiency. Stable vitals. No immediate red flags. But the fear in her eyes was real. What happened, Ashley? Car accident. They think I might have internal bleeding, but the tests aren't clear yet. The doctor said we're waiting to see if it gets worse before doing surgery. Ashley's hand reached out, gripping Elena's. But what if it does get worse? What if they wait too long? Elena understood the fear, the terror of being a passive victim of medical decision-making, of trusting people you don't know with your life. She'd felt it herself in field hospitals, had seen it in the eyes of every patient who'd grabbed her hand and begged her not to let them die. I'm going to review your charts and imaging, Elena said calmly. And if I think you need surgery now, I'll make sure you get it. That's a promise. Ashley's grip tightened. They said you got fired for making promises like that. I did, and I'd do it again. Elena squeezed back. Because some promises are worth keeping no matter what they cost. She spent the next hour reviewing Ashley's case, conferring with the attending physician, a calm, competent doctor named Singh, who actually listened to her concerns instead of dismissing them. Together, they decided on a watch-and-wait approach with clear escalation criteria. Elena stayed with Ashley, monitoring her vitals, providing reassurance, being the kind of nurse she'd always wanted to be. Skilled, autonomous, respected. By the time she left Ashley's bedside, it was nearly 5 p.m. Elena's phone showed 47 new messages, including one from the hospital board asking her to attend the press conference at 6. She was about to decline when Bishop appeared. You're going, he said simply. I'm exhausted. I've been awake for 36 hours. I'm not in any condition to... You're going because those nurses at Mercy Point need to see you standing tall. Because the next veteran who applies for a job needs to know that fighting back works. Because Ashley Rodriguez in there is going to watch the news tonight, and she needs to see that the nurse who promised to protect her keeps her promises. Bishop's expression softened. And because you've earned the right to stand in front of those cameras and tell your story. Your way, not Chen's way, not the hospital's way, yours. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but I'm not changing clothes. They get me in scrubs or they don't get me at all. Wouldn't have it any other way. The press conference was held outside Mercy Point General, a calculated choice by the hospital to show transparency and commitment to change. The board had set up a podium with microphones, and the lawn was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Elena arrived with Bishop and Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd insisted on accompanying her as a show of support from Denver Memorial. Whitmore was already at the podium, reading a prepared statement about the hospital's commitment to patient safety and veteran employment. Behind him stood the other board members, Patricia, and several nurses who'd worked with Elena. Notably absent, Marcus Chen and Danielle Frost. When Whitmore finished, he gestured to Elena. And now, I'd like to introduce the person this initiative is named for. Elena Marsh. Elena stepped forward, blinking against the camera flashes, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. For 3 years, she'd avoided this, avoided being visible, being known, being anything other than quietly competent. Now she was standing in front of the world, about to speak her truth. She adjusted the microphone and took a breath. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm a Navy veteran, a combat medic, and a nurse. And 2 days ago, I was fired from this hospital for refusing to let a patient die. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I'm not here to attack Mercy Point General. The board has taken responsibility, implemented meaningful changes, and shown a commitment to ensuring this doesn't happen again. That's more than many institutions would do, and I respect them for it. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But I'm here to say this. There are thousands of veterans working in healthcare across this country. We bring skills and experience that civilian training can't replicate. We've performed surgery in war zones, made life or death decisions under fire, and held the line when everyone else ran. And too often, we're treated like problems instead of resources. We're told our military experience doesn't translate, that we're too rigid, too traumatized, too difficult to work with. Elena's voice strengthened. I'm here to tell you that's wrong, dead wrong. Military medics and corpsmen are some of the most skilled, dedicated healthcare professionals in the world. We just need civilian medicine to give us the respect and authority our training deserves. We need institutions that value our expertise instead of fearing it. We need colleagues who ask about our experience instead of assuming we're broken. A reporter called out, "What would you say to other veterans facing similar discrimination?" Elena looked directly at the camera. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't accept being treated as less than you are. And remember, every time you stand up for a patient, even when it costs you, you're honoring the oath you took when you first put on a uniform. That oath didn't end when you left the military. It's part of who you are. Another reporter. Will you be filing a lawsuit against Mercy Point? No, the board has done the right thing. Senator Castellano is advancing legislation that will protect other veterans. My focus is moving forward, not looking back. What about Dr. Chen? Elena hesitated, thinking about the man who'd made her life miserable for 6 months, who'd nearly cost Stephanie Morrison her life, who was now facing the destruction of his own career. Dr. Chen is facing the consequences of his actions. That's appropriate. I hope he learns from this and becomes a better physician, but that's his journey, not mine. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, about her military service, about the surgery on Senator Castellano's son, about her plans at Denver Memorial. Elena answered them all with calm precision, refusing to be drawn into attacks or recriminations, focusing instead on systemic change and patient advocacy. Finally, Whitmore stepped forward. I think that's enough for today. Ms. Marsh has been through a challenging 48 hours. Let's give her some space. Elena stepped back from the podium, suddenly aware of how close she was to collapse. Bishop caught her elbow as she stumbled slightly. Time to go, he said quietly. They were walking toward the SUV when someone called out, Elena, wait! Elena turned to see Emma Rodriguez running toward her, towing an older woman behind her, Stephanie Morrison's mother, the grandmother from the ICU. Emma was maybe 7 years old, with dark braids and eyes still red from crying. You're the nurse, Emma said breathlessly, the one who saved my mom. Elena knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the cameras still tracking her movement. How's your mom doing, Emma? She woke up today. She remembered me. She said my name. Emma's voice broke. Grandma said you're the reason she's alive, that you fought for her when nobody else would. Elena felt tears threaten for the first time all day. Your mom's strong, Emma. She fought hard too. Emma hugged her suddenly, fiercely, her small arms surprisingly tight. Thank you for not giving up on her. Thank you for keeping my mom alive. Elena hugged back, feeling 3 years of isolation and doubt crack open completely. This was why she'd fought. Not for recognition or vindication or career advancement. For this, a 7-year-old girl who still had her mother because someone had been willing to stand up when it mattered. You're welcome, Emma, she whispered. You're so welcome. The grandmother pulled Emma back gently, tears streaming down her face. We'll never forget what you did, Elena. Never. They walked away and Elena stood there on the hospital lawn, surrounded by cameras and reporters and onlookers, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than she'd ever felt in combat. Bishop's hand on her shoulder was the only thing keeping her grounded. Come on, warrior, he said softly. Let's get you home. They were almost to the SUV when Elena's phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer it. Elena Marsh. Miss Marsh, this is Admiral James Kellerman, Chief of Naval Personnel. The voice was crisp, authoritative, unmistakably military. I've been following your situation with great interest. We need to talk about your discharge status. Elena's heart stopped. Sir? Your record shows an administrative separation, but given recent events and the completion of the investigation that prompted that separation, we're prepared to offer you the opportunity to return to active duty with full restoration of rank and benefits. The Navy needs people like you, Petty Officer Marsh. We need them badly. Elena looked at Bishop, at Denver Memorial behind her, at the reporters still filming, at the life she'd just started to build. Sir, I need time to think about this. Take 72 hours. But Elena? The Admiral's voice softened slightly. Welcome home. Regardless of what you decide, welcome home. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, trying to process what had just happened. The Navy wanted her back. After 3 years of believing she'd been cast out forever, they wanted her back. Bishop raised an eyebrow. That sounded important. They want me to return to active duty, full restoration. What are you going to do? Elena looked at the hospital, thought about Ashley Rodriguez waiting in Trauma Bay 2, about the nurses at Mercy Point who needed advocates, about Denver Memorial giving her the authority to practice medicine the way she'd been trained. She thought about wearing a uniform again, about belonging to something bigger than herself, about serving alongside people who understood sacrifice and duty and the weight of impossible decisions. I have no idea, she said honestly. Bishop opened the SUV door. Then let's get you somewhere quiet where you can figure it out, because something tells me you're about to make another decision that changes everything. They drove away from Mercy Point General as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Behind them, the hospital, the protesters, the cameras, the chaos. Ahead, 3 different futures: Denver Memorial, active duty Navy, or something Elena hadn't even imagined yet. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena Marsh had the power to choose. The question was, which choice would cost her the least and which would cost her everything? Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from an unknown number that made her blood run cold. We need to talk about Kandahar, about what really happened that night, about the 32 lives you saved and the one you didn't. Call me, before I call you. Colonel David Richardson. Richardson. The officer she'd defied, the one who'd been court-martialed and imprisoned because of her testimony, the one who'd just been released from Leavenworth. Elena stared at the message until her vision blurred, Richardson's name burning into her retinas like a brand. The man who'd ordered her to abandon 32 wounded Marines because evacuating them would compromise his tactical position. The man she'd defied, saving every single one of those Marines while he retreated to safety. The man whose court-martial had cost her everything she'd built in the Navy, and now he was free, and he wanted to talk. Problem? Bishop's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Elena showed him the message. Bishop's jaw tightened as he read it, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Richardson got out? Apparently. When? I don't know. The Navy didn't notify me. Elena's hands were shaking again, the adrenaline crash finally hitting after 48 hours of sustained crisis. They're supposed to notify victims when prisoners are released. It's protocol. Bishop pulled the SUV into a parking lot and killed the engine. Call Hernandez right now. Elena dialed with trembling fingers. Captain Hernandez answered on the second ring, her voice immediately tense. Elena, what's wrong? Richardson contacted me. He says he's out of Leavenworth. Silence. Then, that's impossible. He's serving a 10-year sentence. He shouldn't be eligible for parole for another 6 years. Then how is he texting me? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Forward me that message immediately and don't respond to him. Do you understand? Do not engage. Elena forwarded the text. Captain, what's going on? I don't know yet. But Richardson had powerful friends, people who believed his version of events, who thought you were insubordinate instead of heroic. If he's out, if someone pulled strings to get him released... Hernandez paused. Where are you right now? Denver, with Commander Bishop. Good. Stay with him. I'll make some calls and get back to you within the hour. Hernandez's voice hardened. Elena, if Richardson is out and he's making contact, it's not for closure or forgiveness. He blames you for destroying his career. Be careful. The call ended. Elena sat in the silent SUV, processing the impossibility of the situation. 2 days ago, her biggest problem was getting fired from a hospital job. Now she was facing job offers from elite institutions, legislative initiatives bearing her name, and a convicted criminal who apparently had enough influence to walk out of military prison years early. "We need a secure location," Bishop said, already pulling out his phone. "Somewhere Richardson can't find you while we figure this out." "I'm not hiding from him." "I'm not suggesting hiding. I'm suggesting tactical positioning." Bishop's tone shifted into pure military efficiency. "You're exhausted. You've been in the public eye for 2 days straight, and now you've got a credible threat from someone with motive and potentially the resources to act on it. We regroup, we gather intelligence, then we engage from a position of strength." Elena wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She nodded. Bishop made 3 calls in rapid succession, speaking in the kind of shorthand that only worked between people who'd operated together. Within 15 minutes, they were heading toward a private security facility on the outskirts of Denver, a place Bishop described as where operators go when they need to disappear for a while. The facility was unmarked, protected by serious security, and staffed by people who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. Bishop vouched for Elena at the gate, and they were cleared through to a small apartment unit that was somehow both Spartan and comfortable. "You'll be safe here," Bishop said. "No one gets through that gate without clearance. Get some sleep. I'll coordinate with Hernandez and find out what the hell is happening with Richardson." But sleep was impossible. Elena's mind was running combat scenarios, threat assessments, tactical responses. All the training that had kept her alive in war zones now applied to a threat she'd thought was neutralized. She paced the small apartment, replaying that night in Kandahar, the decision that had defined and destroyed her career. It had been a night operation gone catastrophically wrong. Richardson's platoon had walked into an ambush, taking heavy casualties in a valley with no quick evacuation route. Elena had been with the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, that arrived to extract them. Richardson had ordered immediate withdrawal, leaving the wounded behind because the enemy fire was too intense. Elena had refused. She'd organized the corpsmen, established a defensive perimeter, and spent 4 hours under sustained fire stabilizing and evacuating every single wounded Marine. All 32 had survived. Richardson had filed charges against her for insubordination. The investigation had uncovered his pattern of abandoning wounded to preserve his own safety, leading to 14 preventable deaths in previous engagements. He'd been court-martialed. She'd been quietly discharged to avoid the media circus. And now he was free. Her phone rang. "Hernandez." "I've got answers," the captain said without preamble. "And you're not going to like them." Richardson was granted early release 3 weeks ago under a classified review process. The decision came from the Secretary of Defense's office. The SecDef personally intervened in a court-martial case? That's what it looks like. I'm still digging, but the official reasoning is new evidence that supposedly exonerates him. The details are sealed. Elena felt ice in her veins. What kind of new evidence could possibly exonerate him? There were 32 witnesses. I was there. The investigation was thorough. I don't know, but Elena, listen carefully. Richardson didn't just get released. He got his rank restored and accepted a position as a military contractor consultant. He's advising the DoD on combat medical protocols. The irony was so bitter, Elena almost laughed. The man who abandoned wounded Marines is now advising the military on medical care? It gets worse. I've received word through back channels that Richardson is claiming you falsified reports, that you exaggerated the casualty situation to make yourself look heroic. He's building a case that your discharge was justified, and that his court-martial was based on perjured testimony. That's insane. There are recordings, after-action reports, witness statements, all of which are now classified under the same seal that covered your discharge. Richardson, or someone helping him, has locked down the evidence. Hernandez's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Elena, they're trying to rewrite history. And with you suddenly in the national spotlight, Richardson sees an opportunity to destroy your credibility before you can threaten his rehabilitation. Elena sat down hard on the apartment's couch. So what do I do? You go public. You tell your story before he tells his version. You've got the platform now. Use it. But the records are classified. I can't prove anything without violating national security protocols. Then you focus on what you can prove, your service record, your decorations, the fact that 32 Marines lived because of your actions. You make Richardson prove his accusations, and you trust that the truth will come out. After Hernandez hung up, Elena sat in the silence, feeling the walls close in. Going public meant more media attention, more scrutiny, more exposure. It meant turning her personal trauma into a public spectacle. But staying silent meant letting Richardson control the narrative, meant watching him destroy everything she'd sacrificed to protect. Bishop returned an hour later with food and information. Richardson's been busy. He's scheduled to appear on a major news network tomorrow night. The teaser says he's going to set the record straight about a naval scandal that destroyed an innocent officer's career. Elena closed her eyes. He's moving fast. Because he knows you're vulnerable right now. You're famous, but you're also controversial. Half the country thinks you're a hero, the other half thinks you're an insubordinate troublemaker. Richardson's betting he can shift public opinion before you can solidify your position. What would you do? Bishop sat across from her, his expression serious. I'd fight. Not because I wanted to, but because men like Richardson count on good people backing down. They count on us being tired, being scared, being too damaged to fight back. And every time we prove them right, they get stronger. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Sarah Chen at Denver Memorial. News is reporting that your military service is under investigation. Hospital board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your employment status. I'm fighting for you, but I need you to call me ASAP. Then another text, this one from Senator Castellano. Hearing disturbing allegations about your service record. Need to speak with you before this affects the legislation. Call immediately. And another from Patricia at Mercy Point. Elena, I'm so sorry. Chen's lawyer is using Richardson's allegations to demand his reinstatement. They're saying you lied about everything. What's happening? The dominoes were falling exactly as Richardson had planned. Discredit her military service, and everything else collapsed. Her credibility, her job prospects, the legislative initiative, the public support. He was executing a perfect information warfare campaign, and she was losing ground by the hour. I need to make a statement, Elena said. Tonight, before his interview airs. Bishop nodded. I'll set it up. But Elena, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Richardson isn't just trying to clear his name, he's trying to destroy yours. Within 3 hours, Bishop had coordinated a press conference at the security facility. The major networks sent crews drawn by the promise of Elena's first response to the allegations. Senator Castellano arrived personally, along with his chief of staff and a team of lawyers. Dr. Sarah Chen came too, standing in silent support. And at the back of the room, wearing his dress blues, stood Ryan Harrison. Elena stepped to the podium at 9 p.m., facing a sea of cameras and skeptical reporters. She wore her Navy uniform, the one she'd kept in storage for 3 years, the one that still bore her rank insignia and ribbons. If Richardson wanted to fight about her service record, she'd fight in the uniform she'd earned. My name is Hospital Corpsman First Class Elena Marsh, United States Navy. 3 years ago, I was honorably discharged following a classified incident in Afghanistan. Tonight, I'm here to address allegations made by former Colonel David Richardson regarding that incident and my service record. She paused, letting the cameras focus. On the night of August 17, 2022, I was part of a quick reaction force responding to a platoon under heavy fire in Kandahar province. When we arrived, we found 32 wounded Marines and 1 officer, Colonel Richardson, who ordered immediate withdrawal without evacuating the wounded. I refused that order. I organized the medical evacuation, and over 4 hours of sustained combat, my team successfully extracted every single wounded Marine. All 32 survived. A reporter called out, Colonel Richardson claims you falsified the casualty count to justify your insubordination. Elena looked directly at the camera. Then I invite Colonel Richardson to speak with those 32 Marines. Their names are public record. They're alive, serving, or honorably discharged, and every one of them can testify to what happened that night. I don't need to falsify anything when I have 32 living witnesses. Another reporter, why was your discharge classified? Because the investigation into Colonel Richardson uncovered evidence of multiple incidents where he abandoned wounded personnel. The Navy wanted to avoid a media circus that would damage morale and compromise operational security. My discharge was the price of that discretion. Do you regret that decision? Elena thought about 3 years of hiding, of being invisible, of cleaning toilets at Mercy Point because her sealed discharge made her unemployable in competitive medical positions. Every single day. But I'd make the same choice again to protect those Marines and their families from becoming political pawns. Senator Castellano stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. I'd like to add something, if I may. My son is alive because Elena Marsh refused to abandon a patient when ordered to do so, exactly like she refused to abandon 32 Marines. That consistency isn't insubordination, it's integrity. And I've personally spoken to 5 of those Marines from Kandahar. They all told me the same thing. Petty Officer Marsh saved their lives when their commanding officer left them to die. The room erupted with questions, but Castellano raised his hand. I'm also announcing tonight that I've requested a full review of Colonel Richardson's early release and reinstatement. The process appears to have bypassed normal oversight, and the American people deserve to know why a convicted officer received such preferential treatment. Elena saw the calculation flash across the reporters' faces. This wasn't just a he said, she said anymore. This was a senator taking on the Department of Defense, demanding accountability. The story was escalating beyond Richardson's control. Harrison stepped forward next, his dress blues immaculate, his bearing unmistakably military. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Harrison, retired. I trained Petty Officer Marsh. I served beside her in 3 combat zones. And I can tell you without reservation that she is the finest combat medic I've ever worked with. Colonel Richardson is a coward and a liar, and I'll testify to that under oath in any venue, military or civilian. The press conference continued for another 40 minutes, with more witnesses coming forward. Marines Elena had treated, corpsmen she'd trained with, officers who'd served alongside her. By the time it ended, the narrative had shifted completely. Richardson's allegations looked increasingly desperate and unsupported, while Elena's account was corroborated by a growing chorus of credible witnesses. But Elena knew Richardson wouldn't give up easily. Men like him never did. She was proven right at 11 p.m. when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Petty Officer Marsh. Richardson's voice was smooth, cultured, utterly devoid of the rage she'd expected. Quite the performance tonight, very moving. Colonel Richardson, or should I say former Colonel. Actually, it's Mr. Richardson now, Consultant Richardson, if you prefer. I'm no longer bound by military protocol, which gives me certain freedoms I didn't have before. Elena put the phone on speaker so Bishop could hear. What do you want? I want to offer you a deal. You withdraw your support for Castellano's investigation. You publicly acknowledge that perhaps your memory of Kandahar is imperfect after all these years, and I'll drop my allegations. We both move on with our lives. You want me to lie? I want you to be practical. Elena, you're about to start a war you can't win. I have resources now, money, political connections, media access. I can drag this out for years. I can make your life a living hell, or we can both walk away and rebuild our careers in peace. Elena looked at Bishop, who was already recording the call. You're right about one thing, Richardson. I am about to start a war. But not with you. Against the system that let you abandon 14 Marines to death, that covered it up, that court-martialed you, and then quietly released you when the heat died down. You're just the symptom. I'm going after the disease. Richardson's smooth facade cracked slightly. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The people who secured my release, they're not going to let some decorated corpsman destroy their investment. Then they can explain to Senator Castellano and the press why they invested in a man who left wounded Marines to die. I'm sure that'll play great in the next election cycle. You're bluffing. You don't have the evidence to prove anything. I don't need evidence. I have 32 living Marines who you abandoned. I have Harrison's testimony, I have my service record, and I have something you'll never have, Richardson: credibility. Because when people look at you, they see a man who saved himself. When they look at me, they see someone who saved others. That's a war you can't win. Richardson was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. You just made a very serious mistake, Petty Officer. Very serious. The line went dead. Bishop stopped the recording. Well, that was subtle. He's scared. Scared people make mistakes. Scared people with powerful friends make dangerous mistakes. Bishop's expression was grim. You just backed him into a corner. He's going to come at you with everything he has. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Let him. I'm done hiding. I'm done being quiet. Richardson wants a war? He's got one. The next 24 hours proved Bishop right. Richardson appeared on his scheduled news interview, smooth and sympathetic, painting himself as a victim of a vindictive subordinate who'd falsified reports to cover her own insubordination. But the interviewer had done her homework, pressing him on details that didn't align with his story. When asked why 32 Marines would lie to support Elena's version, Richardson claimed they'd been influenced by their gratitude in the fog of war. It didn't land well. Social media erupted with veterans defending Elena, calling Richardson a disgrace. 3 of the 32 Marines from Kandahar posted video testimonials describing in graphic detail how Richardson had abandoned them and how Elena had saved their lives under fire. By morning, Richardson's media strategy was in shambles. But he wasn't done. Elena received a call from Denver Memorial's legal department. Richardson had filed a defamation lawsuit against her, Harrison, and Senator Castellano, seeking $20 million in damages. The lawsuit claimed that their statements had destroyed his reputation and career prospects. Dr. Sarah Chen called within the hour. The hospital board is spooked. They're worried about being dragged into litigation. I fought for you, Elena, but they're putting your start date on hold pending resolution of the lawsuit. Then Patricia called from Mercy Point. Chen's lawyer is using Richardson's lawsuit to argue that you're a liability. They're demanding this hospital rescind the advocacy initiative and reinstate Chen. The board is meeting tomorrow to decide. And finally, Senator Castellano's chief of staff. The Senate leadership is pressuring the senator to drop the investigation into Richardson's release. There are concerns about politicizing military justice. The senator is standing firm, but he needs ammunition, hard evidence that Richardson's release was improper. Elena sat in the apartment, watching her carefully rebuilt world crack apart again. Richardson had found her pressure points and was squeezing systematically, turning her victories into liabilities, her allies into hesitant supporters facing their own consequences. He's good, Elena admitted to Bishop. Better than I expected. He's desperate, Bishop corrected, and desperation makes people sloppy. We just need to find where he's cutting corners. The answer came from an unexpected source. At 2 p.m., Elena received an email from an encrypted address. The message was brief. If you want to know how Richardson got out early, look into the Fortress Group. They're military contractors with DoD connections. Richardson consults for them now. Follow the money. A friend Bishop ran the email through security protocols and traced it to a military IP address. Someone inside the system, someone with access to classified information. The Fortress Group was real, a massive private military contractor with billions in DoD contracts and enough political influence to move mountains. They sprung Richardson to use his military experience for their operations, Bishop said, putting the pieces together. But they couldn't have him with a court-martial on his record, so they got it overturned. Someone at the DoD level pulled strings, sealed the evidence, and handed him a consulting contract. Can we prove it? Not without classified access, but we don't need to prove it. We just need to make enough noise that someone with oversight authority investigates. Elena called Castellano. Senator, I've got a lead on Richardson's release. It connects to the Fortress Group, a major defense contractor. If you subpoena their financial records and Richardson's consulting contract, I think you'll find evidence of improper influence. Castellano was silent for a moment. That's a serious allegation. The Fortress Group has friends on both sides of the aisle. Going after them could kill the legislation and end my investigation. Or it could expose corruption at the highest levels of defense contracting. Your choice, Senator. But if Richardson is just the tip of a larger problem, officers being shielded from accountability because contractors need their expertise, then this is bigger than me or him. This is about the integrity of military justice. Another pause. Then, I'll make some calls, but Elena, if you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. Richardson practically admitted it on the phone call we recorded. He said the people who secured his release wouldn't let me destroy their investment. That's not legal language. That's business language. Castellano's voice hardened with determination. Send me that recording. Encrypted. I'm calling in some favors with the Senate Armed Services Committee. If the Fortress Group is corrupting military justice, we're going to expose it. The call ended. Elena sat back, feeling the momentum shift again. Richardson had underestimated her willingness to escalate, to turn a personal conflict into a systematic investigation. He thought she'd back down to protect her career. Instead, she was betting everything on exposing the corruption that had freed him. Bishop was watching her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. You know, this might not work, right? You're going after some of the most powerful people in the defense establishment. They have resources you can't match. I know. And even if you win, even if you expose everything, Richardson might still walk away with his freedom and his career. The system protects people like him. I know that too. So why are you doing this? Elena thought about the 32 Marines, about Stephanie Morrison, about Michael Castellano, about every patient she'd fought for when the system said to let them go. She thought about the nurses at Mercy Point who needed protection, about the veterans facing discrimination, about the next Elena Marsh who shouldn't have to choose between integrity and survival. Because someone has to. Because if I walk away now, Richardson wins. Not just against me, but against every person who ever stood up to power and got crushed for it. I can't stop that pattern alone. But I can make enough noise that maybe someone else will join me, and then someone else. Until there are enough of us that the system has to change. Bishop nodded slowly. You sound like Harrison. Harrison taught me that the hardest battles are the ones where victory looks like just surviving long enough to fight again tomorrow. I survived Kandahar. I survived 3 years of hiding. I survived Mercy Point. I can survive this. That night, Elena gave an interview to a major investigative news program. She laid out the timeline of Richardson's release, his connections to the Fortress Group, and her suspicions about improper influence. She provided the recording of Richardson's phone call, his threatening language, his admission that powerful people had invested in his freedom. The story went viral within hours. #FortressGate started trending. Defense policy wonks and military justice experts began dissecting the timeline, finding inconsistencies in the official explanations for Richardson's release. 3 senators beyond Castellano called for investigations. Richardson fired back with another media appearance, calling Elena unstable and obsessed, claiming she was fabricating conspiracy theories to justify her insubordination. But his smooth confidence was cracking, his responses more defensive, his lawyer visibly uncomfortable beside him. Then the dam broke. A whistleblower from within the Department of Defense leaked documents to the press, showing that Richardson's release had been expedited through irregular channels, that his court-martial conviction had been administratively overturned without proper review, and that the Fortress Group had lobbied intensely for his freedom. The documents also showed that Fortress had donated significant sums to political campaigns of officials who'd signed off on Richardson's release. The scandal exploded. The Secretary of Defense was called to testify before Congress. The Fortress Group's stock price dropped 15% in a single day. And Richardson's defamation lawsuit was quietly withdrawn by his lawyers, who were now more concerned with their own legal exposure than his reputation. Mercy Point General's board reversed course, announcing that the Elena Marsh Patient Advocacy Initiative would proceed as planned and that Chen's employment termination was final. Denver Memorial called to confirm Elena's start date with an apology for the delay and a signing bonus. Senator Castellano's Veterans Healthcare Employment Protection Act gained 20 co-sponsors overnight and was fast-tracked for a vote. And through it all, Elena watched from the secure apartment, feeling like she was witnessing something larger than herself unfold. She'd started this journey just trying to save one patient. Now she was part of exposing systemic corruption that had protected abusive officers and perverted military justice. Captain Hernandez called with news that made Elena's breath catch. The Navy is conducting a formal review of your discharge. Given the irregularities around Richardson's case and the new evidence about the original investigation, there's a strong possibility they'll not only restore your active duty status, but also back pay you for the 3 years you were out. I don't want back pay, Elena said. I want the record corrected. I want it acknowledged that I was right to disobey Richardson's order. You might get both. Elena, you're about to become the face of military justice reform. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about the question. Was she prepared to be visible, to be a symbol, to carry the weight of representing every service member who'd ever been punished for doing the right thing? I don't think anyone's ever prepared for that, she said honestly, but I'll do it anyway. 3 days after the whistleblower leak, Elena received a different kind of message. This one came through official channels, from the Department of the Navy. Petty Officer Marsh, you are hereby requested to appear before a board of inquiry regarding your administrative discharge. The board has been empowered to review all evidence, including previously classified materials, and make recommendations for corrective action. It was happening. The system was actually responding, actually investigating, actually considering accountability. Bishop drove her to the hearing, which was held at a federal building in Denver, rather than requiring her to travel to D.C. The board consisted of 3 admirals, 2 JAG officers, and a civilian oversight representative. Richardson had been subpoenaed to testify. Elena walked into the hearing room in her dress blues, feeling the weight of 3 years of silence about to break. Richardson was already there, seated with his lawyer, looking smaller somehow than he had in her memory. Prison had aged him, but more than that, his confidence had eroded. He looked like what he was, a man watching his carefully constructed rehabilitation collapse. The board chairman, Admiral Patricia Chen, no relation to Marcus, called the hearing to order. This board has been convened to review the administrative discharge of Hospital Corpsman First Class Elena Marsh and to determine if corrective action is warranted. Petty Officer Marsh, you are represented by JAG counsel. Elena stood. No, ma'am. I'm representing myself. Very well. Mr. Richardson, you've been subpoenaed to provide testimony regarding the events of August 17th, 2022. Do you understand that you're under oath? Richardson stood stiffly. I understand, Admiral. Then let's begin. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Elena testified first, walking through that night in Kandahar minute by minute. The ambush, the casualties, Richardson's order to withdraw, her refusal, the 4-hour evacuation under fire. She provided radio transcripts, after-action reports, and video testimony from 15 of the 32 Marines she'd saved. Richardson testified next, attempting to maintain his version that the casualties weren't as severe as Elena claimed, that her actions had risked the entire force, that she'd exaggerated the situation to justify insubordination. But under questioning from the JAG officers, his story fell apart. The medical records didn't support his casualty assessment. The radio log showed him ordering withdrawal while Elena was actively treating critical patients. The Marine's testimony was devastating, describing in detail how Richardson had left them to die and Elena had saved them. Then the board revealed the evidence that sealed Richardson's fate. The whistleblower documents showing that the Fortress Group had paid for Richardson's legal defense during his court-martial and had lobbied for his early release specifically to employ him as a consultant. The implication was clear. Richardson's military expertise was valuable enough that powerful people had corrupted the justice system to free him. Admiral Chen looked at Richardson with undisguised contempt. Mr. Richardson, did you cooperate with the Fortress Group's efforts to overturn your court-martial conviction? Richardson's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Richardson's face had gone gray. I decline to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me. Then this board has no choice but to recommend that your early release be revoked and your case be referred to the Department of Justice for investigation into possible corruption charges. Admiral Chen turned to Elena. Petty Officer Marsh, it is the finding of this board that your discharge was unjust, that your actions on August 17, 2022 were not only appropriate but exemplary, and that you deserve full reinstatement with back pay and promotion to Chief Petty Officer, retroactive to the date you should have been promoted had your discharge not occurred. Elena stood perfectly still, processing words she'd never expected to hear. Furthermore, Admiral Chen continued, this board recommends that you be awarded a formal commendation for your actions that night, and that the Navy issue a public apology for the circumstances of your discharge. Do you accept these findings and recommendations? Elena looked at Richardson, saw the defeat in his eyes, the recognition that he'd lost everything trying to destroy her. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only tired relief that the truth had finally prevailed. I accept, Admiral. Thank you. The hearing ended. Richardson was escorted out by federal marshals. The DOJ investigation had apparently moved faster than anyone expected, and he was being arrested on charges of corruption and conspiracy. His lawyer followed, already on her phone, probably calculating how to distance herself from the disaster. Elena walked out of the federal building to find a crowd waiting. Reporters? Yes, but also veterans, nurses, and civilians who'd followed her story. They cheered when they saw her, and Elena felt overwhelmed by the response, by the realization that her fight had become their fight, that her victory was somehow meaningful to people she'd never met. Senator Castellano was there too, grinning broadly. "Congratulations, Chief Petty Officer Marsh. The legislation passed the Senate an hour ago. Landslide vote. It heads to the House next week, and the President has already committed to signing it." Elena shook his hand, still processing. "Thank you, Senator, for everything." "Thank me? You gave my son his life back. This is the least I can do." He paused. "There's talk of a presidential commendation for your actions, both in Kandahar and at Mercy Point. You've become something of a national hero." "I'm just a nurse who refused to let people die." "That's exactly why you're a hero." Castellano's expression turned serious. "What are you going to do now? Return to active duty? Stay at Denver Memorial?" "You've got options, Elena. Real options." Elena looked at the crowd, at the people holding signs supporting her, at the veterans in uniform who'd come to witness her vindication. She thought about Ashley Rodriguez in Denver Memorial's trauma bay, about the nurses at Mercy Point who needed advocates, about the next crisis patient who would need someone willing to fight protocol to save their life. She thought about Admiral Kellerman's offer to return to active duty, about wearing the uniform again, about belonging to something larger than herself. And she realized she'd been thinking about this wrong the entire time. It wasn't about choosing between military and civilian medicine. It wasn't about hiding or being visible. It wasn't even about Navy versus hospital. It was about being exactly who she was, wherever that was needed most. "I'm going to do both," she said. "Navy Reserve. I'll serve 1 weekend a month, keep my commission and skills current, and the rest of the time I'll work at Denver Memorial, training the next generation of trauma nurses. I'll advocate for veterans and healthcare, push for the reforms Senator Castellano's legislation mandates, and make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." Castellano smiled. "That sounds perfect and exhausting. I've had 3 years of rest. I'm ready to work." Bishop appeared at her elbow, phone in hand. "Hate to interrupt, but you've got a call you need to take. Admiral Kellerman." Elena stepped away from the crowd and answered. "Chief Petty Officer Marsh." "Congratulations on your reinstatement, Chief." Kellerman's voice was warm. "I've been following the proceedings. Hell of a fight." "Thank you, sir." "I'm calling to formally extend the Navy Reserve offer. We need you, Chief Marsh, not just for your medical skills, but as proof that the system can correct itself when it fails good people. You'd be training the next generation of combat medics, helping us rebuild trust with service members who've seen too many Richardson types protected while the righteous get punished." "I accept, sir, with the understanding that my civilian position comes first and the reserve commitment works around that schedule." "Done. Welcome back to the Navy, Chief. We'll have your orders processed by end of week." He paused. "One more thing. The Marines you saved in Kandahar, they're organizing a reunion. They want to meet the woman who gave them their lives back. I think you should go." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I'd like that, sir. I'd like that very much." The call ended. Elena stood on the federal building steps, looking out at the life she'd rebuilt from ashes, at the people who'd supported her, at the future that suddenly felt full of possibility instead of limitation. Her phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. "You won. But this isn't over. The system you expose doesn't forget. Watch your back. A friend." The same encrypted contact who tipped her off about the Fortress group. Elena deleted the message without responding, but she saved the number. Whoever this person was, they had access to information she might need. And they were right. Exposing Richardson and the Fortress group had made her powerful enemies. People who'd invested in corrupting military justice wouldn't simply accept defeat. But Elena had learned something crucial in the past week. She didn't have to fight alone anymore. She had Bishop, Harrison, Castellano, Hernandez, and thousands of veterans and civilians who'd rallied to support her. She had the law on her side now, and the moral authority of someone who'd been proven right when the system said she was wrong. She walked down the steps toward the waiting crowd, ready to face whatever came next. And in a dark room across the city, someone watched the news coverage of Elena's vindication and made a phone call. She exposed Richardson. The Fortress contract is dead. We've lost millions. A pause as the person on the other end responded. Yes, I understand, but she's too visible now. We can't touch her directly. Another pause. No, we go after her support structure. The senator, the hospital, the veterans who testified for her. We make her victories so expensive that she becomes radioactive. Make everyone who helped her regret it. The call ended. Plans were set in motion, and Elena Marsh, newly reinstated chief petty officer and hero to millions, had no idea that her real war was just beginning. Elena's first day at Denver Memorial began at 05:45 hours, the sky still dark over the Rockies, the hospital already alive with the controlled chaos of shift change. She walked through the emergency department doors in fresh scrubs bearing her new title, Chief Petty Officer Elena Marsh, Trauma Specialist, and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes tracking her movement. The viral nurse, the war hero, the woman who'd exposed military corruption and survived. Dr. Sarah Chen met her at the nurse's station with coffee and a tablet loaded with patient charts. Welcome to Controlled Chaos. We've got a multi-vehicle pileup inbound, ETA 7 minutes, and I'm putting you straight into the deep end. That okay? Elena smiled, feeling something settle into place inside her. That's perfect. The next 4 hours were pure medicine, assessing trauma patients, coordinating with surgeons, teaching residents the difference between textbook protocols and battlefield adaptation. Elena moved through the department with quiet authority, her hands steady, her decisions precise. When a 23-year-old motorcyclist arrived with catastrophic injuries and the attending physician hesitated on whether to operate, Elena calmly reviewed the scans and said, "He's got maybe 20 minutes before that splenic laceration bleeds him out. We move now or we lose him." They moved. The patient lived. By noon, Elena had saved 3 lives, prevented 2 unnecessary surgeries, and earned the grudging respect of an emergency department that had been skeptical about hiring someone with so much baggage. She was grabbing lunch in the break room when her phone buzzed with a message from Bishop. "Need to talk. Secure line. Now." Elena found an empty office and called. Bishop answered immediately, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "We've got a problem. Someone leaked your home address online. Right-wing sites are calling you a traitor who destroyed a patriotic officer's career. There have been threats. Nothing credible yet, but the volume is concerning." Elena felt ice in her stomach. Richardson's supporters? Some. But there's coordination happening that suggests organization beyond random trolls. I've got contacts looking into it, but Elena, you can't go home tonight. Maybe not for a while. I'm not running from internet threats. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to be smart. Bishop's tone softened slightly. You've made powerful enemies. The Fortress Group lost a $100 million DoD contract because of the investigation you triggered. Richardson is facing federal charges. There are people who want you to pay for that, and they're not going to play fair. Elena thought about the encrypted message warning her this wasn't over. What do you suggest? Move into secure housing temporarily. I've got a place. Better security than that apartment, close to the hospital. Give us time to identify who's organizing the harassment and shut it down. How long? Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how serious they are. Elena looked out the office window at the emergency department, at the patients who needed her, at the life she'd just started rebuilding. The idea of hiding again, of letting fear dictate her movements, felt like surrender. But Bishop was right. Being brave and being stupid were different things. Okay, 1 week. But I'm not canceling my shifts and I'm not stopping the advocacy work. Wouldn't expect you to. I'll have the place ready by tonight. The call ended. Elena sat in the silence, processing the reality that her victory over Richardson had painted a target on her back. She'd exposed corruption, but corruption didn't die quietly. It adapted, found new strategies, new weapons. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Senator Castellano. House vote on the legislation is tomorrow. Leadership expects it to pass, but we've encountered unexpected opposition. Defense contractors are lobbying hard against it. Can you be in D.C. for the vote? Your presence would help. Then Dr. Chen. Hospital board wants to meet with you this afternoon. They're concerned about security risks. I'll be there to support you, but thought you should know. And finally, Patricia from Mercy Point. Elena, I'm so sorry. Someone vandalized the Advocacy Initiative plaque outside the ER. Spray-painted traitor across your name. Hospital security is investigating, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. The attacks were systematic, coordinated, designed to isolate her and make everyone who'd supported her regret that decision. Make her too toxic to employ, too controversial to defend, too expensive to stand beside. Elena stood and walked back into the emergency department, where a teenager with a compound fracture was screaming in pain and an elderly woman was coding in Bay 3. She moved toward the code, assessing the situation, calling orders, fighting for a life that protocols said was probably already lost. The woman's heart restarted after 4 minutes of CPR. The teenager's fracture was reduced and stabilized. 2 more lives saved because someone had been willing to fight when giving up would have been easier. That afternoon's board meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as Elena had anticipated. The hospital's general counsel presented security concerns, liability issues, and public relations risks. 3 board members questioned whether Denver Memorial could afford to employ someone who attracted death threats and national controversy. Dr. Sarah Chen stood and addressed the room with barely controlled fury. Let me be clear about what you're proposing. You want to fire a decorated Navy medic with an exemplary service record because she exposed corruption and criminals don't like it. You want to tell every veteran employee in this hospital that if they stand up for what's right and it makes powerful people angry, we'll abandon them to save ourselves from bad publicity. Dr. Chen, we're simply suggesting that perhaps Miss Marsh would be more comfortable in a less high-profile position. Chief Marsh, Elena interrupted quietly, and no, I wouldn't be more comfortable. I'm comfortable fighting for patients in your emergency department. The question is whether you're comfortable having me do it. The board chairman, a surgeon named Dr. Robert Walsh, studied Elena with sharp eyes. Chief Marsh, I've reviewed your performance over the past 4 days. You've saved 7 lives, prevented 3 unnecessary surgeries, and taught our residents more about combat trauma medicine than they'd learn in a year of textbooks. You're exactly the kind of medical professional we want on staff. He turned to face the other board members. But more than that, she represents what this hospital should stand for: excellence, integrity, courage. If we fire her because criminals are threatening her, we're telling the world that Denver Memorial can be intimidated into abandoning our own people. I won't be part of that decision. 2 other board members nodded agreement. The general counsel started to object, but Walsh cut him off. Chief Marsh stays. We hire additional security if needed. We support the legislation she's championing, and we make it very clear that Denver Memorial stands with veterans who've sacrificed for their country. Meeting adjourned. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not everyone was backing away. Some people were willing to stand firm. Consequences be damned. Dr. Chen walked her out of the boardroom. You've got friends here, Elena. More than you know. Half the nursing staff wanted to attend that meeting to show support. I told them you'd prefer they focus on patients, but the sentiment was real. Thank you for fighting for me. I'm not fighting for you. I'm fighting for the principle that good medicine requires good people, and good people shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing. Dr. Chen paused. Senator Castellano called me this morning, asked if you could take a few days' leave to be in D.C. for the vote. I told him you could take whatever time you need. This legislation matters, Elena. It's bigger than one hospital. Elena nodded. I'll fly out tomorrow. That evening, Bishop picked her up from the hospital and drove her to the new secure location, a modern apartment in a building with serious security infrastructure. Real security, not just cameras and keypads, but trained personnel and vetted access protocols. This is excessive, Elena said, looking around the well-appointed space. This is necessary, and before you argue, it's paid for by a veterans advocacy organization that's taken an interest in your case. You're not a burden, Elena. You're an investment in systemic change. They want to make sure you survive long enough to see it through. Elena wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself, but exhaustion was catching up with her. She'd been running on adrenaline and determination for over a week, and the crash was inevitable. Bishop seemed to read her mind. "Get some sleep. I'll be across the hall if you need anything." "And Elena?" He paused at the door. "You did good today. At the hospital, at the board meeting. You're showing people what strength looks like. Don't let the threats convince you otherwise." Elena slept for 10 hours straight, the first real rest she'd had since the helicopter had landed at Mercy Point a lifetime ago. She woke to find messages from Harrison, from 3 of the Marines she'd saved in Kandahar, from nurses at Mercy Point expressing support, from strangers thanking her for standing up to corruption, and one message from an encrypted number. "The people targeting you are making mistakes. They're getting sloppy because they're angry. We're documenting everything. Stay strong. Justice is coming. A friend." Elena stared at that message, wondering who her mysterious ally was, what they knew, what their endgame looked like. But she had a plane to catch and testimony to prepare, so she filed it away and focused on the immediate fight. The flight to Washington, D.C. was surreal. TSA agents recognized her and waved her through expedited screening. Fellow passengers asked for selfies. A flight attendant upgraded her to first class and thanked her for her service. Elena was simultaneously honored and uncomfortable with the attention, with being reduced to a symbol instead of a person. Senator Castellano met her at Reagan National with his chief of staff and a security detail. "Chief Marsh, thank you for coming. The vote is tomorrow morning, but we've arranged for you to meet with several House members tonight who are on the fence. Your story could push them to support the legislation." The next 12 hours were a blur of congressional offices, handshakes, and carefully controlled testimony about discrimination in healthcare, about veterans struggling to transition from military to civilian medicine, about the systemic barriers that wasted talent and expertise. Elena spoke to representatives from both parties, finding common ground and shared respect for military service, even when politics diverged elsewhere. By midnight, Castellano's chief of staff pulled her aside. "You're good at this, really good. We've had 3 representatives flip to supporting the bill after talking to you. You're making a difference." The vote the next morning was anticlimactic in its efficiency. The Veterans Healthcare Employment Protection Act passed the House 347 to 78, a landslide that reflected broad bipartisan support. Elena watched from the gallery as legislators she'd spoken to the night before stood to speak in favor of the bill, several mentioning her story specifically. When it was over, Castellano found her in the corridor. "It goes to the president's desk next week. She's already scheduled a signing ceremony. You'll be there, front and center, because this is your victory." "It's not my victory, Senator. It's a victory for every veteran who's been discriminated against, every nurse who's been silenced, every—" "Elena." Castellano's use of her first name was deliberate. "Take the win. You earned it. And you're going to need the momentum for what comes next." "What comes next?" "Richardson's trial starts in 6 weeks. The prosecution wants you to testify about Kandahar, about his pattern of abandoning wounded personnel. They're building a case that his actions constitute criminal negligence, possibly even dereliction of duty. Your testimony is crucial." Elena had known this was coming, had prepared herself mentally, but the reality still hit hard. Standing in a courtroom, reliving that night, facing Richardson again while the whole country watched. "I'll do it," she said. "Whatever they need." She flew back to Denver that afternoon, exhausted but energized, ready to return to the emergency department and the work that made sense. Bishop met her at the airport with news that the online harassment had intensified. More threats, more doxing, more coordinated attacks on her social media. "But we've got a lead," Bishop said as they drove toward the secure apartment. "The friend who's been feeding you intel? They identified the organization coordinating the harassment. It's a PR firm hired by the Fortress Group. They're running a smear campaign to destroy your credibility before Richardson's trial." "Can we prove it?" "Better. We can expose it. Your mysterious friend has documentation, emails, payment records, strategic planning documents. They're ready to leak it to the press, but they want your permission first." Elena thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Do it. Expose everything. The leak hit the news that evening. A major investigative outlet published a comprehensive exposé showing how the Fortress Group had hired a notorious PR firm to orchestrate a harassment campaign against Elena, complete with bot networks, coordinated doxing, and paid influencers spreading disinformation. The document showed the campaign's explicit goals: destroy Elena's credibility, make her unemployable, force her into hiding before Richardson's trial. The backlash was immediate and devastating. The Fortress Group's stock price collapsed. 3 major DoD contracts were suspended pending ethics investigations. The PR firm's client list was leaked, revealing they'd run similar campaigns against whistleblowers and journalists. The CEO resigned within 24 hours, and Richardson, already facing federal corruption charges, saw his legal situation deteriorate further as prosecutors added witness intimidation to the indictment. Elena watched the implosion from her apartment, feeling a grim satisfaction that the people who'd tried to silence her had instead amplified her message. Every attack had backfired. Every attempt to destroy her had made her stronger, had rallied more people to her cause. 3 weeks later, Elena was back in Kandahar. Not literally, but in memory and testimony, as she sat in a federal courtroom describing that August night in 2022. Richardson sat at the defense table, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeated slump of his shoulders. His legal team had been decimated by resignations as the evidence mounted and the public sentiment turned overwhelmingly against him. Elena's testimony was clinical and devastating. She walked the jury through Richardson's order to abandon 32 wounded Marines, her refusal, the 4-hour evacuation under fire. The prosecution played radio recordings of Richardson's voice ordering withdrawal, while Elena's voice could be heard in the background coordinating medical care. Then they brought in the Marines. One by one, 15 of them took the stand and described how Richardson had left them to die and how Elena had saved them. Several broke down crying while testifying. The jury watched with visible emotion, several members wiping their eyes. Richardson's defense tried to paint Elena as insubordinate and unreliable, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: corruption, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and criminal negligence. Richardson showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but Elena saw his hands shaking as the marshals led him away. The sentencing hearing was set for 6 weeks later. Richardson faced up to 25 years in federal prison. Elena walked out of the courthouse to find the 32 Marines waiting, all of them, even those who'd had to fly in from across the country. They stood in formation, saluted her in unison, and then broke ranks to embrace her one by one. "You saved my life," each one said in their own way. "You gave me a future. Thank you." Harrison was there too, standing back and watching with visible pride. When the reunions finally wound down, he approached Elena and handed her something. A challenge coin, custom-made, with her name and the date of the Kandahar operation engraved on one side and 32 lives, one decision, absolute courage, on the other. "The Marines had these made," Harrison said. "Every one of them carries one. They wanted you to have the first one minted." Elena held the coin, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. Not just that night in Kandahar, but every fight she'd ever fought for patience against systems that valued protocol over people. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "This means everything." 2 weeks later, the president signed the Veterans Healthcare Employment Protection Act in a ceremony at the White House. Elena stood behind the president as she signed, flanked by Senator Castellano, Harrison, and 3 of the Kandahar Marines. The legislation would protect thousands of veterans from the discrimination Elena had faced, would recognize military medical training in civilian credentials, would create enforcement mechanisms for hospitals that violated the law. The president turned after signing and shook Elena's hand. "Chief Marsh, this legislation exists because you refuse to be silent, refuse to accept injustice, refuse to let the system crush you. Thank you for your service, both in uniform and out." That night back in Denver, Elena returned to her shift at Denver Memorial. The emergency department was typically chaotic: a cardiac arrest in Bay 2, a pediatric trauma in Bay 5, a psychiatric crisis in the waiting room. Elena moved through it all with practiced efficiency, her hands steady, her decisions precise. At 11 p.m., a familiar face appeared in the ER. Stephanie Morrison, walking on her own, accompanied by Emma and her mother. Stephanie looked healthy, vibrant, fully recovered from the internal bleeding that had nearly killed her. "Chief Marsh," Stephanie said, emotion thick in her voice. "I wanted you to see me. Wanted you to know that I'm okay, that Emma still has her mom because of you." Emma hugged Elena tightly. "I told all my friends about you, about how you're a real hero." Elena knelt down to Emma's level. "You know what makes someone a hero, Emma? Not being perfect or fearless. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You can be that kind of hero too." After they left, Dr. Sarah Chen found Elena in the break room. "You've got a visitor, conference room B." Elena walked into the conference room to find her mysterious ally waiting, a woman in her 50s wearing a Navy commander's uniform. Elena recognized her immediately, Commander Lisa Fitzgerald, who'd been part of the original investigation into Richardson's conduct. "Commander Fitzgerald, you're the friend who's been helping me." Fitzgerald nodded. "I couldn't let Richardson's people destroy you, not after what you did for those Marines, not after watching the system fail you the first time." She paused. "I've been fighting from inside the system to change it. You've been fighting from outside. Together, we made something impossible happen. Why help me? You risked your career, your security clearance, because 30 years ago, I was a junior officer who witnessed a superior officer's negligence get people killed, and I stayed silent because I was scared of the consequences. I've regretted that silence every day since." Fitzgerald's eyes were fierce. "When I saw Richardson trying to destroy you, I knew I couldn't be silent again. Sometimes the risk is worth it." They talked for an hour, comparing notes on the systemic changes still needed, on the officers who needed accountability, on the veterans who needed protection. By the time Fitzgerald left, Elena understood that this fight would continue long after Richardson's sentencing, that changing military culture and healthcare practices was work measured in decades, not days, but it was work worth doing. Richardson's sentencing hearing brought Elena back to federal court one final time. The judge, a former Marine Corps JAG officer, looked at Richardson with undisguised contempt as he read the sentence. 20 years in federal prison, dishonorable discharge formally recorded, all military benefits stripped, requirement to pay restitution to the families of the 14 Marines who died due to his previous negligence. "Mr. Richardson," the judge said, "you betrayed every value the military holds sacred. You abandoned those who trusted you to lead them. You corrupted the justice system to avoid accountability. And when you were exposed, you tried to destroy the person who had the courage to stand up to you. This sentence reflects the severity of your crimes and the depth of your dishonor." Richardson was led away in handcuffs. Elena watched him go, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, only tired relief that this chapter was finally closed. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked her how she felt. Elena thought about the question carefully before answering. "I feel grateful. Grateful for the people who stood with me when it would have been easier to walk away. Grateful for the system's ability to correct itself when enough people demand accountability. And grateful that maybe, just maybe, the next veteran who faces what I faced will have a little more protection, a little more support, a little more chance of being heard." "What's next for you, Chief Marsh?" Elena smiled. "I'm going back to work. I've got patients to care for, nurses to train, and a promise to keep, that I'll use this platform to make sure veterans in healthcare get the respect and opportunity they've earned. That's not a one-time fight. That's a career." 6 months later, Elena stood in the Denver Memorial Emergency Department training room, facing 30 nursing students, half of them veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare. She'd developed a specialized program combining combat medical training with civilian protocols, teaching these veterans how to translate their skills without losing the edge that made them exceptional. "You're going to face people who don't understand what you bring to medicine," Elena told them, "who see your military background as a liability instead of an asset, who think you're too rigid, too aggressive, too difficult. And I'm here to tell you, they're wrong. Your training, your experience, your ability to make life or death decisions under pressure, those are strengths. Own them, defend them, and never, ever let anyone convince you to be smaller than you are." One student, a former Army medic named Sarah Chen, no relation to the doctor, raised her hand. What if they fire us for standing up? What if we lose everything like you almost did? Elena thought about Mercy Point, about the helicopter landing, about Richardson's trial, about every moment when standing up had cost her something precious. Then you stand up anyway, because some things are worth losing everything for. And you know what I learned? When you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to compromise your integrity for convenience, you don't lose everything. You lose the things that didn't deserve you and make room for something better. The training session continued for another 2 hours. Afterward, Elena walked through the emergency department, checking on patients, consulting with residents, living the life she'd fought so hard to claim. Her phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Kellerman. Chief Marsh, the Navy is establishing a new combat medic training program based on your recommendations. We'd like you to lead curriculum development. Interested? Before she could respond, Dr. Sarah Chen appeared with a tablet. We've got a grant application approved. Denver Memorial is creating a Veterans in Medicine Fellowship program. You'd be the director, supervising 10 veteran healthcare workers annually as they transition to civilian practice. Full salary, full benefits, full authority to shape the program however you want. Elena looked at the two opportunities, at the life she'd rebuilt from ashes, at the platform she'd been given to create systemic change. She'd started this journey as a quiet nurse just trying to survive. She'd become a symbol of resistance, a catalyst for reform, a voice for thousands of veterans who'd faced discrimination and silence. But more than that, she'd become exactly who she'd always been, someone who refused to watch people die when she had the power to save them. Whether those people were patients on operating tables, or veterans struggling to find their place in civilian healthcare, or Marines bleeding out in Afghan valleys. That night, Elena stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the Denver skyline. Her phone showed messages from Harrison, from the Kandahar Marines, from Senator Castellano, from Stephanie Morrison, from nurses at Mercy Point, from veterans across the country thanking her for fighting. She thought about Chen at Mercy Point, now permanently barred from practicing medicine after additional complaints surfaced. She thought about Richardson, serving 20 years in the same prison where he'd briefly been held before. She thought about the Fortress Group, its leadership in prison and its contracts terminated. Justice hadn't been perfect, but it had been real. The system had bent, but it hadn't broken. And she was still standing, stronger for the fight, ready for whatever came next. Bishop appeared in the doorway behind her. You ready for tomorrow? Tomorrow was the first annual Elena Marsh Veterans in Healthcare Symposium, where 200 medical professionals would gather to discuss best practices, share experiences, and build networks of support. Elena had organized it with help from Fitzgerald, Castellano, and a coalition of advocacy groups. Yeah, Elena said, I'm ready. Good, because I've got one more surprise for you. Bishop handed her an envelope. Inside was a formal invitation from the White House. The President requests the honor of your presence at a ceremony honoring recipients of the Presidential Citizens Medal for exemplary service to the nation. Elena read it twice, not quite believing. This is real? As real as it gets, you're being honored for exposing corruption and advancing veterans' rights. The ceremony is in 3 weeks. Elena thought about the quiet nurse who'd shown up at Mercy Point 6 months ago, head down, trying to be invisible. She thought about that woman cleaning toilets, fetching coffee, enduring mockery and dismissal because she'd believed being small was safer than being seen. She'd been wrong. Safety wasn't in invisibility. It was in standing tall, in using her voice, in refusing to accept that the world had to stay broken just because fixing it was hard. I'll be there, she said, and I'm wearing my uniform. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the East Room of the White House as the President placed the Presidential Citizens Medal around her neck. The citation read, "For extraordinary courage in exposing systemic corruption, advocating for justice, and advancing the rights and dignity of veterans in healthcare. Through personal sacrifice and unwavering integrity, Chief Petty Officer Elena Marsh exemplifies the highest ideals of public service." The room erupted in applause. Elena looked out at the audience. The Kandahar Marines in dress blues, Harrison and Bishop standing at attention, Senator Castellano and his son Michael, Dr. Sarah Chen and the Denver Memorial staff, Patricia and the nurses from Mercy Point, Stephanie Morrison and Emma, Commander Fitzgerald in uniform. All the people who'd stood with her, who'd fought beside her, who'd refused to let her stand alone. The president shook her hand and whispered, "The country is grateful for your service, Chief Marsh, both in combat and in the fight for justice." That night, back in Denver, Elena walked into the emergency department for her regular shift. The medal was locked safely in her apartment, but she wore her uniform, Navy Reserve, reporting for duty. A teenage girl arrived in full anaphylactic shock, her airway closing, her family panicking. Elena moved with practiced precision, administering epinephrine, securing the airway, stabilizing vitals. The girl lived, gasping grateful breaths as her terrified parents held her hands. "Thank you," the mother said through tears. "Thank you for saving her." Elena smiled, feeling the truth of her purpose settle deep in her bones. "That's what I do. That's what I'll always do." She moved on to the next patient, the next crisis, the next life that needed fighting for. The emergency department hummed around her, monitors beeping, doctors calling orders, nurses coordinating care, the beautiful chaos of medicine practiced with skill and compassion. This was where Elena Marsh belonged, not hiding in the shadows, not shrinking to avoid conflict, but standing tall in the center of the storm, using every skill she possessed to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. They tried to break her. They tried to silence her. They tried to make her disappear. Instead, they'd forged her into something stronger, a weapon against injustice, a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that one person standing up could change systems that seemed unchangeable. Elena Marsh had been dismissed as the quiet new nurse. Now she was Chief Petty Officer Elena Marsh, Presidential Citizens Medal recipient, director of 2 groundbreaking programs, and living proof that refusing to be small could change the world. And she was just getting started.